Hey guys, my name is Nikki Renfroe. I'm a recently retired state trooper, and I decided to start a podcast, Safe Nation Podcast. We're covering safety, security, and law enforcement. Well, I'm glad you're here, but look, let me tell you this. So today, before this interview, I went to get my makeup done. And so the young lady was like, "Oh, well, who are you going to interview today for your podcast?" And I said, "Well, it's a guy who used to be in law enforcement. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Victor Hill." And she said, "The Victor Hill?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, the Victor Hill." She says, "Oh my God." She said, I never lived in Clayton County, but I have relatives who do. I got a lot of friends who live down there. And girl, she said, they are so upset because he's not the sheriff anymore. And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Didn't he go to prison?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk a lot about how he got to that point. You go from being sheriff for years in a county where some people say that you were effective when it came to fighting crime. Some people say they felt safe in the community. Other people said that you were arrogant, you were narcissistic, you were chauvinistic, you were inconsiderate, you were dismissive. So I'm asking you the question, who are you and how do you describe yourself?
That's interesting. You brought up a memory. I remember telling somebody one day, I said, I really would like to meet Victor Hill one day. I really would. And the reason I said that is I've had a chance when I had here to sit in barbershops and conversations would come up about Victor Hill. And of course, I don't think anybody realized it was me. I think they think he's some guy that's like 7'2" or something like that. So it was very interesting conversation. Sometimes I get involved in it, and of course I'd be the protagonist, and I'd act like I didn't like him. And just to hear what people were saying was very fascinating. Even when I went to my sabbatical, for lack of a better term, I would hear fascinating stories there as well.
Your
too.
sabbatical was?
Yeah, Arkansas prison, where I was set, exactly, right. And it's interesting the stories that made it all the way out there. And it's just interesting. So when you're in public, when you're a public figure, you're going to hear all of that. Some people are going to say, "Hey, greatest guy I ever met." Some are going to say, "Meanest guy I ever met." You got to look at who is making a statement and where they're coming from. I mean, if you're someone I arrested or fired, I'm sure you're going to think I'm a mean guy. And if you're somebody that I had the privilege of helping, you're going to think I'm a great guy. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast.
Who made you, though, who you are, the man that you are? Who taught you how to be a man?
It's a good question. That's a combination of so many people. I mean, I had good parents. I was raised actually I was raised in a single parent home. I was raised by my grandmother and my mother. A lot of good male role models, uncles, good neighbors. One of the greatest influence would probably be my first martial art teacher. Was a great man, very tough guy. He was in the Marines. He was Force Recon, been a very good martial artist, and I'm very fortunate to learn from him at a young age. So if anyone that toughened me up, it would have been him, because he ran his classes like a Marine Corps boot camp.
But would you say that it got extreme at some point? Your fascination with being tough?
I'm not fascinated with being tough.
No?
But I'm happy he toughened me up, because life is tough. Life can throw blows at you. Like, look what I had to deal with, being accused of something that wasn't true, having it plotted against me. And, you got to be mentally tough. One thing that my brother once said this to my nephew, and I thought it was brilliant, because we got a nephew. He's probably a great athlete, great boxer, jiu-jitsu. But he often tells my nephew, he said, "Listen, I don't care if you can bench press 500 pounds. If you're mentally weak, you're weak." So, life is hard, and life throws blows at you. And it could be anything. We just saw what happened to a lot of people this weekend with the storm. And you got to be mentally tough to withstand anything. So I don't think it's a fascination with being tough. It's just important to be tough, especially if you're in a tough line of business.
Do you think your expectations are too high, specifically for people who work with you? Do you set the bar too high?
Well, again, everything comes from different people's perspective. I'm not I'm not one of those guys that sit around and watch football. I don't keep up with it. But what I do like about football is I like studying people at the top of their game. So, if you're a top quarterback, what's the gentleman's name with the Patriots? I can't think of it, but Tom Brady, yeah. Exactly. Even if I'm not interested in what you do, I'm interested in people who are the best at what they do. So if you're able to win 6 or 7 Super Bowls, I want to know, how do you train? What is your mentality or whatever like that? Well, I considered fighting crime. I wanted my team to be the best team. If there was a such thing as a Super Bowl of crime fighting, then I wanted a team that could win the Super Bowl. So I had high expectations. So just like a good recruiter is going to want to recruit the fastest, the brightest, the strongest, that's what I wanted to do. So it wasn't an indictment on anybody for that reason. But if you're going to go out for the NFL, you got to perform at a certain level. Well, that's how I see law enforcement. For us to be able to rescue people, rescue hostages, be able to get someone out of a building that's flooding, we got to be in a certain amount of shape. We got to be able to swim. We got to be able to run. We can't defend ourselves. How can we defend others? If your children are in a school and somebody comes in and starts taking their lives, or it's about to, you want someone that can come in and he's very well versed with his firearm and he can use it. So that's what I was looking for. I think some people that didn't quite make that cut, and they may have been offended, but it was nothing personal. I just needed a team that could win the war on crime.
There were some people that didn't make the cut.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about when you fired over 20-something officers. It was said that you had snipers on the roof
mm-hmm.
to watch them as they exited the building and left the property.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about why you chose to put snipers on the roof. Why was it necessary to go to those extremes? Because you chose not to keep them on any longer and continue on during your administration.
I'm glad you asked. Matter of fact, there's a chapter in my book. I think you got that book right there, right? I'm going to tell you about it. You hold it up for a second so you can see it. Everybody can see it. That's right. I think there's actually a chapter called Snipers on the Roof. So, here's what a lot of people don't know, and they don't know the backstory. Because you got to understand, when you deal with the media, there's 2 ways to lie. You can lie by commission as well as omission. So sometimes, and this being an ex-law enforcement yourself, it's not what people tell you, it's what they don't tell you. That's very, very, very important. So there's a lot about that story that wasn't told. For instance, you got to remember, right before I took office, the sheriff that took office before in the next county, DeKalb County, he sent out 37 notices that he would no longer need their services. And he was shot and killed in his front yard. And when they found out who shot and killed him, guess what? It was one of the people who was fired. Okay. So we know it's not uncommon for violence to take place on employment situations. We used to call it back in the day going postal. So there was times when unarmed postal workers were being armed. Well, remember, when a sheriff has to fire someone, we're having to fire armed people. Everyone we fire carries guns, unless it's a clerk or something. Another thing that a lot of people didn't know, and it's in the book, is the day I was elected sheriff, one of the opponents that was running against me for sheriff was waiting outside my yard for me. And he was in law enforcement. And fortunately, there were people there, and he ran off. And that's something a lot of people don't know. A police report was attempted to be made. They refused to make the report. I think the details are very well written in that book. So there's a lot going on. So I think anyone would be naive to think that, hey, you can just dismiss 27 people and expect everything to be well and we're all going to hug each other and kiss each other. It had already been proven that if a sheriff does that, he can get himself killed or possibly get other people injured or killed. So we took safety and security measures. Now, of course, it was exaggerated. Nobody actually pointed a weapon at anybody, but there were people there because some of the people we fired were SWAT team members. They had access to automatic weapons. So we wanted to make sure that nobody got hurt, and we accomplished that. Nobody did. It got exaggerated, but nobody got hurt, and that was the objective.
Why'd you give me some examples of why you let them go? How did they get chosen?
Well, there was a lot going on. Things with the warehouse. Some of them were people that just shouldn't have been on the team. Like I told you, we were looking for a Super Bowl team. Again, if you got a situation where there's a lot of mismanagement, you got some cases, drug uses, theft. There was other cases where just not the ability to command or lead the condition it was in. We wanted to bring in a new team. And, that's not uncommon in politics. You never see an elected official, especially on the higher up levels, keep the same cabinet members as the other people do. So, but again, you're dealing with politics, and all politics is local. So anything can be spun a particular way.
Okay. So you get rid of the people that you don't want on your team, mm-hmm. and you begin to clean the jail up. Mm-hmm. Tell me the conditions of the Clayton County Jail when it was at its worst. Describe when you were there, when it was at its worst, and then walk me through how you began to make a turnaround.
Well, the jail was probably one of the main reasons that a lot of people were on that list not to come back. And right now, unfortunately, it's probably even worse at this point. But a lot of jails are places that if the right leadership is not there, it's out of control. Right before I took office, there were inmates that actually got a camera in, and they were filming. It made the news. I don't know if you remember back that far, but they were actually smoking drugs and doing other things on camera, showing just how much fun they were having in the jail. There were a lot of suicides. There were several escapes. At that time, I was in robbery homicide. I know a whole robbing crew that I locked at one time escaped out of the jail and got away, and it took a while to get all of them back. 2 murderers actually escaped from the jail. And when they were caught out of state, they actually exchanged gunfire with law enforcement. So you got to understand, running a jail is not easy, and it's very, very. The jail is a microcosm of actually the streets. So here's what you got to think about. Everyone that commits crime in the county goes to the county jail. So every sheriff has a unique opportunity to introduce himself to every criminal in the county because they're usually in and out the jail. But here's where the safety issue comes in. When a person escapes from a jail, they're not going to go get a job. So they can't because they're wanted. So in order for them to survive, they're going to have to rob, they're going to have to steal, and it puts them at direct danger to the public. Just like the 2 guys that were wanted for murder that got out of the jail. One of them was so dangerous. It was a case that I worked in directly when I was in homicide. And actually, it was a home invasion robbery that I worked. And I caught the guy that did the robbery. And he actually robbed the wrong house because it was a duplex. Well, his brother went to that house and tried to kill everyone in the house so his brother could get off. That way there wouldn't be any witnesses. And he almost succeeded, but he ran out of bullets. That's who escaped from the jail. So when we reformed the jail, during the 14 years I was sheriff, we never had an escape, we never had a riot, and we never had any murders in the jail. But in order to do that, we had to bring in a new team because we couldn't do it with a team that was having all the escapes and all the murders.
I see. So what did you do specifically to inside the jail? Go ahead. Because it was always said that at Victor Hill's jail, the inmates had to face the wall. Mm-hmm. That when you walked in, they couldn't even look at you. You would not allow them to look at you. Mm-hmm. Is that true? And if so, why did you implement that?
Good question. So again, people tell stories and they omit a lot from the stories. It's not that they couldn't look at me. It was any staff member. Okay, that really started to protect females. You were in law enforcement, so females in jail, sometimes inmates masturbate in front of them. They look at them inappropriately. They make cat calls and stuff like that. So when we immediately went with inmates facing away, it was with the design to protect the females that were in the jail. Not just the officers, but just nurses and various other civilian staff that works in the jail as well. So that put that to a stop. Also, when they faced the wall, they also had to put their hands behind their back because we had to see what were in their hands because their hands kill, as you know. And even though our jail at that time was free of shanks, unfortunately it's not now, but it was then, you still can't guarantee 100% that a person can't get access to a weapon. So we were able to see their hands. So there was a method to the madness. It wasn't, again, you hear, well, they couldn't look at him. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with safety, and it worked. And the fact that there were no escapes, the fact that we didn't have any murders, the fact that we was able to bring the suicide rate almost down to zero showed that it worked. It had nothing to do with anybody looking at you. Because a lot of times, anytime I addressed the inmates, they had to turn around and look at me anyway so I could talk to them.
So you were able to gain order. I mean, you just told them to face the wall and they just did it? Or how did you get to a point where you got them to comply in that way? Because it can get kind of wild inside of there with some of the behaviors. And so how did you get them to comply with following the orders? Well,
remember, we ran the jail military boot camp style. So really, all we did was mimic what the military boot camp was like. The only difference is when the inmates went to attention, instead of facing us, they faced away. That was the only difference. So, of course, by the time urban legend gets around, no one can look at him or whatever. It had nothing to do with it. It had to do with mostly the protection of the females. And then actually we realized we're accomplishing more with it. In order to attack you, I have to see you. So if the inmates face away or they don't go to the wall, two things. They can't see you, so it's hard to mount an ambush that way because they're facing away. And then number two, it just gives us that level of control because if they don't comply, we know we're dealing with a non-compliant inmate, which is a pre-attack indicator, for lack of a better term, of what they teach us in the training council. So it worked very, very well. And it's something that a lot of jails came and saw, and some of them took it, and some of them are trying to implement it now.
I did read in the book where you changed up the nutrition because you had some inmates who were loud, they were banging on the cells, they were screaming, it was out of control. And you changed up the nutrition. Let's talk about that. What'd you do?
Now, I wouldn't call it the changing the nutrition. It was very nutritious, but I would call it changing nutrition. We try to serve nutritious meals all the time.
Hey, you're here to set it straight. I'm just telling you what I heard, right. And what. So
all of them is supposed to be nutritious. That probably was the most nutritious meal now that you mention it. But anyway, it's called special meal management. The short name for it is Nutriloaf. What I was looking for is nonviolent ways to control violent people. I believe it was Sun Tzu that said that a wise general foresees problems and prevent them before they occur. So a lot of what we were trying to do is prevent the problem before it occurs. Even when we get into discussing how to fight crime, I'm more interested in how to prevent murders than how to solve murders. But of course, that's the crux of the whole controversy because ultimately, a law was turned around and used on me for a prevention tool. So you got this jail, you got a lot of violent people in it, you got maximum security, so you got everybody in there for rape, robbery, murder. The most violent people are in there. Most of them are on lockdown 23 hours a day anyway, so there's nothing more you can take from them. All of the privileges are gone. So you got guys that are beating on the windows, throwing feces, throwing urine. And we found just simply with special meal management, that brought all of that to a stop. If everyone became disorderly or had riot-like behavior, then they were put in special meal management, and that was Nutriloaf. And Nutriloaf was basically oatmeal, I believe collard greens, peas, carrots, very nutritious things mixed into one. I ate it. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't nothing Anthony Bourdain would be raving about if he was still with us. And usually 2 to 3 days of that, and people want to go back to regular meals, and they behaved. And our maximum security became so well disciplined and controlled just by using that one technique that I actually walked my 90-year-old grandmother through maximum security when she came to see me. She's no longer with us, but she was very impressed. So nonviolent ways to control violent people is what we were looking to do. That was the vision, because you can't walk in there and just start fighting everybody. And by using nonviolent means, we were able to control the whole jail.
So by using that, along with the boot camp style, military style.
Absolutely.
And then there's the restraint chair.
Absolutely.
That was another technique that you used. This restraint chair is used in a lot of different jails. Mm-hmm. You weren't the first to use it, and probably won't be the last that used it.
Well, maybe. A lot of jails are fearful, so they just stop using it altogether. The Clayton County jail has stopped doing that. So I hope that's not the case, because it's a very good tool. Again, it's passive restraint. It's a very humane way to deal with violent people. So again, we found nonviolent ways to deal with violent people.
Tell me about this chair. So what first of all, what are the rules for using this restraint chair?
All right. So let's start from the beginning. So like you said, safety restraint chairs are used in jails, they're used in hospitals, they're actually used in schools. If you look it up, there's schools that use safety restraint chairs. And interestingly, I read about a lawsuit and won. Notice a lawsuit. Nobody went to jail, but it was just a dispute on when to use it or why to use it. Well, the safety restraint chair, based on our policy, can be used for 3 reasons. It can be used for aggressive behavior, it can be used for destructive behavior, or it can be used for suicidal behavior. Clearly, in the policy, it says that it can be used preventive. There's one clause considered for persons uncontrollably violent, and there's one clause that says it could be used for preventative measures. Okay, so when people say that the policy was violated, that is not correct. I wish I would have brought it today so I could show it to you. Okay, then this as a law enforcement officer, we're taught to use restraints preventively or proactively. Sometimes on traffic stops. I can remember as a rookie pulling over cars, hey, for your safety and my safety, I'm going to put these handcuffs on you. You're not under arrest, but if everything checks out, we're going to let you go. I can't count how many times I've done that. And one time, it was a good thing we did, because when we did realize he was under arrest, he was a very big guy, very capable person, and he became violent, but fortunately the handcuffs were already on him. So it's a very, very good preventative tool. So when people exhibit what we're trained to recognize as pre-attack indicators, it could be threats, sometimes it could be body language and how people come up on you, or things that they did prior before getting to the jail. That's a very good way to stop it. Let me give you an analogy, and it's in the book. There is a highly acclaimed Netflix series that I think a lot of people watch called Blacklist. And if you remember the very first episode, this guy turns himself in, ironically, to the FBI. He's compliant, walks in, does everything they tell him to do. And because of their prior knowledge of who he is and what he's involved in, the first thing they do is they put him in a safety restraint chair. So that's how the chair, and I'm not saying that Hollywood knows policies and procedures, but what I am saying is that's how the chair has been used in my jail and every jail across the country for years, and no one never ever said a word about it. As you know, I'm the first in the history of the country to ever be charged with simply putting someone in a safety restraint chair. Usually, if it comes out with a restraint chair issue, it's because something was done to the person after they were put in a chair or before. Great example, Gwinnett County. You can see videos where there are people in there that are non-compliant, and they rush in and basically assault them and put them in a chair. No criminal prosecution, just a lawsuit. And we've seen situations in the country where people have died in a restraint chair. Some that was brought up in my case where they were tased and died or whatever, and other types of violence. But as far as just a decision to put someone in a restraint chair, I'm the first in the country that's ever happened to. And of course, we know that there's more to the story, and that's why there you have the book. Hold that book up again, as a matter of fact.
Let you hold your book up. You ain't the sheriff right now, okay?
That's right.
So, okay. You're saying that using this safety restraint chair is for the safety of the individual who has given some pre-indication they may do violence,
it's
or
for
they
the
have
safety
already
of everybody, their safety, our safety. Once a person's in a safety restraint chair or they're restrained, everybody's safe at that point. Okay, because once a person is restrained, nothing should be done to them. We've seen a lot of cases where people are handcuffed and then things are done. I've had cases like that where I've had to fire people for it. They handcuff someone and they kick them, or they handcuff someone and then they put a gun to their head. And you could, if you do an open records request, you'll probably see 4 or 5 cases like that at the sheriff's office where I fired individuals for what they did to people once they were restrained. Well, the restraints is for the safety of everybody. That means now they can't do anything to us. We don't have to do anything to them. You see it every day. You see it in courtrooms. You see inmates who are restrained, and they're not because they're violent. They're all non-compliant. They're all compliant, but it's to prevent something from happening, not even giving that person the option to be able to do it. So it's not necessarily that, okay, well, hey, everybody that comes in the courtroom, we think is going to do something. We make sure that they can't do it. But in a situation with the restraint chair, they've done things, said things, been involved in violent situations where we already know we're dealing with somebody violent. You know, one time it came up, well, couldn't you just put them in a cell? Okay. Well, anyone that works in a jail knows that officers have to do hourly checks. So that's when most officers have urine thrown on them, feces thrown on them. They're suddenly punched or attacked. And I could show you a list of incidents like that have happened that were prevented when we use the restraint chair in that manner. Think about this. There was never any murders at the Clayton County Jail during my tenure as sheriff, and how we use that chair. Stop using the chair. 5 people have been murdered. One was trying to kill himself. The officers couldn't use a chair, so they were holding him down. Well, they stayed on him too long, and unfortunately, he suffocated to death. That wasn't their intent. But that shows what happens when you take tools from law enforcement that they can use. The sad part about this whole case is this. That case had nothing to do with the safety restraint chair. Here's what we got to be very, very clear on. There was never a lawsuit. There was never a complaint about the safety restraint chair until the criminal charges were brought against me. No one ever sued. No one. I can't even remember a complaint in internal affairs where someone complained I was put in a safety restraint chair. Even the people who I was charged with, they didn't complain. They didn't go to the feds and say, hey, I was in a safety restraint chair. Can you investigate this? They were solicited. And that's what a lot of people got to understand. When this investigation started, it started over a political campaign. It started over a deputy that I fired or arrested. And I guess he felt that to get back, he was going to run for sheriff, which you can do that. But he decided after he was fired and arrested that he was going to run for sheriff. This was a deputy that was friends with the Clayton County DA. Well, one of his campaign workers was a man that had been in and out of our jail and had been in a safety restraint chair probably 2 times before any of this happened. Well, this man came back to jail and was put in a safety restraint chair again. That's how this all got started. And his name was on the search warrant when they came to the office, but I was never charged with him. And why? The reason I was in charge is because if that went to court and he went on the stand, it would be obvious that this all started from a political campaign. So even though his name was on the search warrant, suddenly this just kind of disappears. We're unable to show the relationship with this man and the DA, or the DA and the judge. None of that stuff was able to be brought out. So you got a jury only being fed a handful of information. So when this investigation starts, they come and they pull every time the restraint chair was used. Well, the restraint chair was used a total of 630 times. 9 times by me, 621 times by my staff for the same reasons. So if this is really about the restraint chair, then why wasn't all 630 people that was in a restraint chair contacted and said, hey, you're a victim, can you come testify? They didn't say they were a victim. They were contacted and told they were a victim. So imagine you get contacted and told, hey, come testify and you can get your charges dropped. And if you sue, you might can get some money. Well, then who's not going to do that, especially if you're doing some serious charges?
But it would take a lot of involvement from quite a few people in order to use that to put you in prison. So
Absolutely.
You're saying that all of these, so there are multiple people involved in...
Absolutely. Hold that book up a second. Hold it
I'm
up.
going to let you have the book. You can hold it up as much as you like.
It's all in here, and how it all started. Keep in mind, here's another thing that a lot of people don't know, because, the media and everyone tried to put the case in a vacuum. If you just look at the case, 7 men were put in a restraint chair and you thought they complained, and then the FBI came in to rescue them. That's not what happened here. These guys were contacted. And not only were they contacted, but you got to understand this color of law violation that I was charged with has a felony charge and it has a misdemeanor charge. It says that if there's a serious bodily injury, it's a felony. So let's just say hypothetically, they shouldn't have been in a chair, which they should have been in a chair. But let's just say they shouldn't have been. And let's just say I was wrong on that. And let's just say that this really was something that was a real criminal investigation and not politically motivated. Okay. Well, none of them were injured, so it should have been a misdemeanor. But they took one word, and one word, they said, well, did you feel any pain? Because the word pain came next to bodily injury. And one of my deputies was actually there because one of the guys was still in jail. So they came to see him. Hey, is this you? Were you in the chair? Did you feel any pain? And he looked, yeah, I felt pain. Okay, that's all we need. So suddenly, a crime that if it really was a crime would have been a misdemeanor. Well, now we can make it into a felony. Well, why did it need to be a felony? Well, they needed a felony because a felony was the only way to get me out of office. Well, we know it was about getting me out of office because we know the people who were involved in it suddenly started running for sheriff. You see what I'm saying? And we know it started out of a political campaign. Another thing we got to do is we got to rewind a second. We got to remember almost a decade ago, the Clayton County DA's office came at me with a 27-count indictment, RICO. So that's probably how all the folklore got started anyway, because, RICO is usually something you go after the mob with. So, RICO means you're running a criminal enterprise. Well, the media never would say what the RICO charges were about. They had to have known. Obviously, they go read the indictments like anybody else. And I made sure some things were sent to them to see if they would cover it, and they didn't. But what was the RICO indictment about? It said I stole my police car 5 times. And every time I stole my own police car 5 times, right? Okay. And every time I put gas in it, it came as a count on the RICO indictment. So think about it. To put gas in a car back then was probably $30, $40. And usually for something to be a felony, if that really was a crime, it would have to be $500. So think about this. It became about a car. So they said every time I drove my car out of town, I stole the car. So they said I actually stole the car 3 times in 2 weeks. So I guess I stole it, gave it back to myself, stole it, gave it back to myself. Because, the car is directly controlled by the sheriff. And the sheriff has to have a car because we're on call 24/7. If one of my deputies, God forbid, kills someone, get killed, or if we have a bad situation, I have to come back. And the county pays for me to come back one way or another. If I'm somewhere and I don't have a car, I have a car that I'm authorized to use in order to get a ticket to come back, to fly back, which is far more expensive than just coming back in a car that I'm assigned to anyway, and I can probably respond to faster because of the emergency equipment. But suddenly out the clear blue sky, it becomes illegal for the sheriff to have his car when sheriffs are in their cars all the time and they leave town all the time in their car. That's nothing unusual. So I kind of made history twice. I'm the first sheriff ever in the history of the country ever charged with stealing his own police car on duty, right? Then 10 years later, if you look at this, okay, people say, well, it's the feds this time. Is it the feds this time? Well, the guy who was in charge of that investigation, a guy named Dennis Baker, guess what? He's on the FBI task force. He's still at the DA's office. He's on the FBI task force. And guess who's leading this investigation about the restraint chair?
The same guy. The
same guy. So there's a backstory to it. If you just look on TV, it's like, oh, wow, there were 6 guys in a chair. They were tortured or what. That didn't happen. everybody that was in the chair was checked by a nurse before and after they got out of the chair. That's policy. So we don't put anyone in that chair until that nurse comes and checks them. They got to check their risk and everything else. Then every 15 minutes, they're checked while they're in the chair. So think about this. I was charged with the same thing. How do you pronounce his name? Chauvin, the one that killed George Floyd? His name is Chauvin or Chauvin. Okay, right. So think about this. We're charged with the exact same charge. He took his knee and put it on a man's neck until he died. I put a person, authorized them to be in a chair, checked by a nurse, checked every 15 minutes. So I'm getting medical attention and constant attention. But he and I are charged with the exact same crime. He kills a man. I get the people, not just medical help, but whatever, medical attention. They didn't need medical attention, but I mean, just make sure it's being monitored so everything's okay. Same charge. Now, here's what we can really prove that it's not about a chair. I was charged with 7 people, not the guy that won the campaign. They let that one go because they didn't want to get out that it started over a political campaign. Only one I'm found not guilty of. And guess why? Why? Because there's a video where you could clearly see a sergeant saying, put him in a chair. So, if it was illegal for him to be in a chair and he shouldn't have been in a chair, why was it, not that I want that sergeant to be indicted, no one should have been indicted, but if that was really their concern, why didn't they pursue the sergeant? It wasn't me that put him in a chair. So if I did, I would have been charged and convicted of it. As long as somebody else does, that made it mean that the investigation was about me. It wasn't about the chair.
What's the relationship with the DA? Because what you're describing, there's a lot that has to go across the DA's desk. Mm-hmm. A lot that has to, that's a lot of power.
Well, let's hold this book up one more time. What you see the subtitle, right? It says the truth about corrupt prosecutors weaponizing the legal system. So let's talk about that a second. Okay. The DA is a political adversary of mine. Every campaign that's come out, some campaigns you can see her face on my opponents. There was some guy named Watkins that ran against me. And you can see the DA's face on his mail out saying that she endorsed him, which is fine. She can endorse who she wants. But when you start using your office as a way to either
what'd you do to piss her off?
What'd I do to piss her off?
What started this?
Now
the hate.
That you would have to ask her. I mean, what's the old saying? Who knows the heart but God?
But you have an idea.
Well, I think that's why it's so important. Which you read the book.
I read the book, right. But I want to hear it from you. Like what really pissed her off to where if you're saying that like every campaign or every whatever, she's always opposing you on a lot of different things. So I'm like, what started this?
You'd have to ask her that. You need to have her on this show. I can't read you. All I can tell you, she's been a political adversary, and all I can tell you is that she supported people against me. And was supporting the guy that was running against me at the time where his campaign worker was placed in a chair. She also was supportive and worked closely with the chairman, who we know he wanted to be sheriff because he ran for sheriff after this happened. And we also have an incident where they worked together where he forged a letter to make it sound like it came from me. I mean, we got a witness as proof. That somehow made the news. It made one news station. And I think you can see it on social media now as we speak. So there's your motive. The motive is to get me out, to get one of her friends in. Now, as far as if there's some type of personal thing, you'd have to ask her that. I mean, I can't live in her head like that. All we know it's related to a campaign. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you have her on the show, I'd ask her.
I might have to. I just might have to do that.
Right. So now, and remember now, this is not just a theory. We have a woman that's a witness to all of this. She was privy to conversations with the DA. The DA told her about the case in a restraint chair, told her about her relationship with the judge, told her how we're working to get a conviction. This is not just some conspiracy theory. And then when the chairman wrote this letter, it was put on her. And she can prove it's not her that wrote the letter. I think anybody can see it would have to been him that wrote the letter.
This is the chairman of the county commission.
Exactly. And then what does he do? Run for sheriff. Now remember, he tried to run for sheriff in 2012. So it's not that complicated. I mean, if you want to go into some deep hate issue, you'd have to ask them about that. That I can't answer. But as far as the plot and the motive, it's obvious what it was. It's obvious. It all started with a political campaign. And you got some people who wanted to be sheriff and they needed to get me out so they could get in. Well, they couldn't win the election. So, well, there's only two other ways to get a man out of office. You either do what happened in DeKalb County to Derwin Brown, or you got to get some type of felony conviction. And obviously there wasn't nothing else there to get a felony conviction on, or they wouldn't have came up with something with a restraint chair. So it's pretty simple. It's not that complicated.
So when this went to trial, what kind of, do you feel like you got a fair trial?
No, absolutely not. First of all, remember, the crux of this whole case is it should have never went before the jury. So I'm glad you brought that up. The Supreme Court has ruled, and ironically ruled right around the time I was indicted, that when you use the 242 code, you can't charge law enforcement with something that is not clearly established against the law. There has to be a case, which is usually civil, that says, okay, from this moment on, or you can no longer do this. And it puts law enforcement on notice. Kind of like back when the famous case where the guy was running from the cop for a burglary, and the cop shoots him as he's running. Mm-hmm. Well, if I remember correctly, and we all know, those cops didn't go to jail, but from that moment on, hey, you can't shoot a fleeing felon. So if any cop ever did it from that moment on, it became criminal, in which we've seen it prosecuted and for good reason. Okay, never in the history of the country has anyone went to jail or even was civilly sued for putting a person in a restraint chair. Even the judge admitted that at my sentencing. She said, as far as I can see, no one has ever even been sued for this up until the time of your criminal charges. So then you got the Supreme Court coming down with two rulings right during the time of my indictment saying that if it's not clearly distinguishable that what this person did is illegal, you can't charge them. Okay, so the case should have never went before the jury to begin with. But we know the reason the case went before the jury is because of incestuous relationships, for lack of a better term. You know, as you'll read in the book, you got the judge is friends with the DA. Her husband used to work at the DA's office. The judge is Facebook friends with one of the political opponents that ran for sheriff. So that case was going to go before a jury just on that alone, even though case law says that it shouldn't go before a jury. So then they use certain cases to say, no, there were cases to put on notice. Well, one case is a guy being tased to death in water after or before being put in a restraint chair, and he dies. I mean, there is nothing even close to that with the situations that I was dealing with. Then you got another case where a guy was tied to a hitching post in the hot sun. These people were checked by nurses, checked by officers every 15 minutes. And then I think there was one other case that was far out there that nobody could understand. And not only that, but even after this case went through, the courts never gave any direction. They never said, okay, from this moment on, you can only put the person in a restraint chair if they're uncontrollably violent at that particular moment. And we know that can't be. First of all, it's hard to put an uncontrollably violent person in a restraint chair. Unfortunately, it's going to take some level of force to get them in a restraint chair. Usually the way the restraint chair is designed to be used is to prevent people from committing suicide, to prevent them from doing things. So you want to put them in a chair while they're still cooperative, kind of like the guy I had on a traffic stop. It was almost a similar situation to like what happened, unfortunately, at Wendy's with Rashard Brooks, where I was dealing with a person in the same situation. I said, hey, look, just for your safety and my safety, I'm going to put these cuffs on you. And then as long as you're not under arrest, we'll let you go. Common procedure. So now officers have no direction on what to do. And not only do they have no direction on what to do, now at the Clayton County Jail alone, 5 people are dead. They didn't die in bed bugs. They didn't die of a heart attack. They were murdered. And that would have never happened. The guy that's trying to commit suicide, he would have been put in a safety restraint chair. So nobody would have stayed on him long enough for him to suffocate. Those other guys, anytime people showed pre-attack indicators, they always went to the restraint chair. So 5 people would be alive today, all because of a political campaign and some people that wanted to get an office that they felt they couldn't win at the polls. So... And I think you read the details. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, we won't get into my thoughts. We're here to hear about yours. We'll cover mine toward the end. How
there
about
you
that?
Go. There you go. You taking control.
I am. I got to take control of
All
this.
right, young lady.
Speaking of which, let's segue for one real quick, because I do want to wrap up about the restraint chair, how that got you into prison, and we're going to go into the whole thing about your experience behind bars.
Okay,
now being behind bars. But speaking of taking charge, I'm just curious about your thoughts about women in uniform and women in law enforcement. Because I say that because in your jail, how many jailers, how many women in uniform do you think you may have had at the time working the same roles and the same jobs as men in there?
There were less, but let me tell you why. We did everything proportionate to the jail population. So I asked my staff, okay, what's the male population and female? And we had 80% male in the jail and we had 20% female. So that's okay, we need 80% male and we need 20% female. So that was the mathematical formula. If we had 80% women in the jail, then we would have 80% women guards. There's a reason for that. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some bad women out there. You were one of them. I'll give you credit on that. And, there's Ronda Rousey. I don't think I can tap her right now in a jiu-jitsu match or whatever. No. There are women who can handle it. But you got to understand, if you got maximum security and you got the majority men, there's no way you can send 8 or 10 females in there to handle it. So you got to match muscle with muscle. So all we did was we made sure we kept it proportionate. We've seen videos where one man can take 2 females and throw them around. And that's not an indictment on those females. And there's some females you can't throw around. There's Ronda Rousey. There's you. I think they say you're a kung fu master or something like that. I'm not sure.
I don't know who you're talking to. That is not true. I don't know who that was.
But in order to have control over the jail, most men aren't afraid of women. Most men are stronger than women. So we got to have enough men there to handle the job. But we need women too. Because just like we can't send a bunch of women in maximum security if there was a riot where we didn't have one while I was there. But in case we did, we had what we needed. You know, the same thing. We don't want to send a bunch of men into a women housing unit as well either. So it's just about being proportionate. Or whatever you got to have.
I'm asking this stuff because again, some people see you as being chauvinistic. Some people see you as thinking that even women may be of the weaker gender to the point of not being able to be effective law enforcement leaders. I just want to hear it from Victor Hill what he thinks about women.
Let's clear this up.
Say it with your chest.
Let's clear this up right now. Let's clear this up since you're going to bring this up. Okay. I'm not really concerned whether it's a male or a female, black, white, gay, straight, hermaphrodite. That's not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with whether the person can do the job. Okay. If you're faster than a speeding bullet and more powerful than a locomotive and you can leap buildings in a single bound, I was interested. I didn't care who or what you were. I had 2 women on the SWAT team and 2 were snipers, and one of them was a sniper. One was a sniper. And could outshoot 90% of everyone there. Okay. So I didn't have a problem with it. If you could do the job, I want you there. Now, there was one woman that did make the SWAT team. And I remember when it was brought to me and they were like, well, look, she did everything except drag the 300-pound dummy or whatever like that. But we think she'll be good. And I was like, wait a second now. If one of y'all gets shot, you telling me she can't drag you out? All right, you got to pass every test. So I wasn't opposed to it because there were 2 women on the SWAT team. And one of them could shoot to the point she became a sniper. My thing is, can you do the job? I'm not really concerned with how tall you are, how short you are. I'm not a big guy, if you haven't noticed. Matter of fact, I think you might be taller than me. I'm not sure.
I think you're correct.
Right. But can you do the job? Mm-hmm. And if you can do the job, I'm interested. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a rough job. It's not the type of job that, you're talking about dealing with violent people, murderers, robbers, or whatever. So if you're worried about your nails or your hair, I mean, you could get in a fight with any of them at any time. I mean, it's not that I'm against long hair, but we know what people do with people with long hair. They drag them. That's why the military has short hair. It's not because it's so much discipline. It's because they're in combat situations and they know that can be used against them. Mm-hmm. So the only thing I was interested in is having the best people to do the job. Some people can take it as if, well, he's standards are too high, or people will say anything. They'll say, well, he doesn't, people come up with any reason or why. Mm-hmm. So it can't be females. I wouldn't have 2 females on the SWAT team.
I can say this to you because you know this. The county that you were in, I lived in that county for a lot of the years that you were sheriff. Mm-hmm. And
did you feel safe?
I can tell you what the neighbors said. How about that? I felt safe anyway. I was in law enforcement. I felt safe.
Yeah, but I still want you to feel safe.
I was good.
Okay,
we were good over at my house.
Good.
Okay, but seriously though, some of the neighbors in various neighborhoods, they honestly did say that they felt safer when you were in office. Mm-hmm. They enjoyed having you in office, and I would say, well, why? Why is that? Mm-hmm. And they would say, look, we had a suspected drug house 2 doors down. There were people coming in and out all the time. There were these, thug looking, undesirable looking individuals around all the time. Mm-hmm. And they would say, I called Victor Hill, and he would have this army of deputies come, mm-hmm. More than one, and sit on that house and sit in front of that house and basically force them out, or have a conversation if need be, or knock on the door, or
absolutely.
And the tables turned to where they felt so much pressure that they left the neighborhood, mm-hmm. and sometimes left the county, period.
Yeah.
I've heard those stories from multiple people on multiple different occasions. Mm-hmm. It seems to be a very popular way of thinking about how you did business. Mm-hmm. So when it came to, now we're talking outside of the jail now, when it came to the streets, mm-hmm. what was your methodology in cleaning up the streets and fighting crime? Because you refer to yourself as a crime fighter.
Actually, I was referred to as a crime fighter, and it stuck. It stuck. That actually came out of a meeting, and part came from a citizen and a part came from an adversary. Actually, it was like a joke, and then it stuck, and it kind of went on. So I wish I could take credit for that, but it like stuck, Batman. and it kept me real. Well, the Batman thing, that's another story. Yeah. You can read about that in the book. Unfortunately, that's not such a good story. There was, Batman was born out of a murder, and so was I. So that's another story. But let's get to what you're talking about now.
Okay.
So I don't think what I did on the streets was any different than what I did in the jail. I controlled the territory. At some point in law enforcement, we're going to have to come to grips with it's a tough job. It's tough people. And you have to be tough with tough people. Mm-hmm. There were conversations that needed to be had. And some of those conversations were had in some of these situations of why we're here talking today. But let's just put it this way. Clayton County is not Mayberry. Andy Griffin and Barney Fife cannot control Clayton County. We didn't have criminals like Otis that just come and turn themselves in when they get drunk and lock themselves up. So when you're dealing with thugs on that level, you got to speak a language that they can understand, and they got to know you mean business. And, and that doesn't mean that you got to kill people or beat them. As you can see, I didn't do that because was accused anyway. Well, you talk too rough to her or whatever like that. But, you got to speak a language they understand. those type of folks only understand force. You can't go to their house and say, let's have a cookout and let's hold hands and cry or whatever and say, now don't sell drugs anymore. They got to know you mean business in order for them to leave. And that's what we did. And I don't apologize for that. That's what we're here for. That's what the sheriff is supposed to do. He's supposed to confront outlaws and run them out of town. Mm-hmm. That mission has never changed, be it from the Old West to now. So, you know, that's what a sheriff is supposed to do. If the people in your county aren't afraid of the sheriff and they're not afraid to act up and they don't pay the sheriff no attention whatsoever, you need a new sheriff. Mm-hmm. That's what we're supposed to do.
You had this huge flag at the county line. Well, off of the interstate, leading down one of the main corridors.
I did
in Clayton County.
You know what that was about, right?
No, I don't know what it was about.
You don't?
Why did you have this huge...
You act like you didn't read the book now.
Why did you have this huge... I mean, was it overkill or what?
Absolutely not.
Was it arrogance that you would have your name on the flag? You got your name on the cars?
What is it? You keep floating this... I'm just asking. This word arrogance around,
because
whatever like that.
I gotta see where it is.
You gotta see where it is.
We gotta root it out.
Right.
So.
Has anyone ever defined the word arrogance?
Go for it.
I never really paid attention to the word, but I know getting a job done and being confident about what you do is not arrogance. I think arrogance is thinking that you're better than other people. At least that's what I thought. I'm gonna look up the word to make sure we're on the same thing. But let's look at that seriously, not with through joking. You ride through the city of Atlanta, and no, I don't want to. I got friends in the city of Atlanta, so I don't want this to be an indictment on them or whatever. But you see all this graffiti, and anytime you see graffiti, that's a sign of two things. That's a sign that the criminal's in control because they're marking their territory, and also it can be a sign of apathy by the people in charge, because if they allow it to stay there, then they're not taking the initiative. So in Clayton County, it was simple. Either the sheriff's office is going to be in charge or the criminals are going to be in charge. So I didn't allow anyone to mark the territory. I had basically a graffiti patrol, and they would take a group of inmates, and wherever there was graffiti, we would take it down immediately. If it went up again, we took it down again. So it was zero graffiti in the county at that time. And what the strategy was we were going to mark the territory. Instead of them marking the territory, we were going to mark the territory. So it wasn't just a flag. There was a sign at the entrance of every entrance into the county that says, welcome to Clayton County, where criminals enter at their own risk. So it was a warning. If you're coming in this county to act up, rape, rob, murder, or whatever, you might want to turn around and leave. So instead of allowing the criminals to mark the territory, we marked the territory. You know, I was once speaking to a group of people, and I was telling them, you know, there's certain cities where it almost seemed like the bad guys were in charge. You think at a certain time, there was a time where people said Al Capone ruled Chicago, or a certain time people thought that John Gotti ruled New York. Okay. When I was sheriff, one thing I wanted to make sure, there wasn't going to be any John Gottis or no Al Capones. Right. No one was going to have any control over that county but the sheriff's office. So no Al Capones, no John Gottis. It was going to be the good guys. It was going to be Victor Hill. Mm-hmm. And that was the message we were trying to take. It had nothing to do with arrogance. It had to do with, hey, there's not going to be graffiti here. There's not going to be gangs here. This is the one place that you're going to have to come and behave. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Mm-hmm. You know, but people are going to, you know, people have their perceptions. But that's what it was about. It was just that simple.
Who was your mentor in law enforcement? Did you have any?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He was a legend, too. Reuben Greenberg was the first police chief I ever worked for. He actually wrote a book. It's still on Amazon to this day. It's called Let's Take Back Our Streets. He literally cleaned up the streets of my hometown. He literally ran all of the criminals out.
What time was that?
When I was with Charleston City Police, it was 1986 up until I came to Atlanta. And he taught me just about everything I know about law enforcement. A lot of what you see that I did, I got to give him credit. I learned from him. I was able to watch him and just see how effective it was. And, you know, a lot of people referred to him as arrogant as well, too. But the people knew what he was doing. He was keeping the city clean, and he was just being tough on criminals. But, you know, people have their perception, and that's their right to have the perception. Whether you want to call it arrogant or confidence, as long as the crime rate is down, whatever name you put on is good with me.
Mm-hmm. Was he the only one, the only mentor?
Lieutenant Frazier taught me a lot about homicides. I had a childhood friend that was murdered. It was a very brutal murder, mutilation. He was the one that solved that murder. That was a catalyst to get me into homicide. I always knew that was the type of crimes I wanted to work.
Tell me about that.
Well, basically, had a childhood friend, didn't show up from an after-school job, and was missing for days. And then when the body was found, and the details of the condition the body was in got around, that put a lot of fear in the community. Nobody never really heard anything like that. Not where I'm from. You don't hear about people being dismembered or stuff. It wasn't nothing common back then, at least not in that area. So he was probably the most decorated homicide detective in Charleston County. He solved the most whodunit murders. There's two types of murders. There's whodunit, and then, of course, there's smoking guns. We know who killed him. Everybody saw him. But then the whodunit is where it's a body. You don't know what happened, and you got to start from ground zero. Well, he became, I would say, my sensei. And I spent a lot of time in homicide before I became sheriff. And so he taught me a lot. Sometimes I would take my cases and run it across him to get ideas. I always wanted to be as good at homicide as he was. So I would say between those two guys, they were great teachers. Mm-hmm. Great teachers.
Why do you think it is that people associate you with being like some kind of mob boss, or where did that come from? Do you know?
I think it came from those ridiculous RICO charges, because I think usually when you charge RICO, it's usually a mob boss that's charged with RICO because they're running a criminal enterprise. So all of a sudden you got the media playing every day, 27 count RICO indictment, and nobody's saying, and they're careful not to say, well, it's just about him driving a car out of town and coming back, and it's by some people, and it's started by some people who don't want him to run for sheriff because they're afraid he's going to beat them, because it was a DA and the sitting sheriff at that time behind it, as we proved in court. Well, I think when those charges, the jury heard it, knew it was ridiculous, and let it out, then all of a sudden I became compared to what's his name in New York when he was beating charges or whatever. The only difference was it was about a car, and no one knew. I don't think, have you ever heard why those, until I'm telling you, until you read the book?
I had no idea.
Exactly. So it may be that. That's the only reason I could think of. When I went to Arkansas, they were all convinced I was the head of the mob too. I would literally have inmates walk up to me and say, hey, that was real smart. I should have done it that way. I should have been a cop first, and, hey, I heard about all the hits, the assassination attempts. And I was like, you heard about what? It was interesting. But, one thing we got to be real careful about. We got to be careful not just about what the media puts out, but what they don't put out. Like I said, you can lie by omission as well as commission. So when you look at both cases, very few people know what that RICO indictment was about. And very few people realize that both of those charges was connected to political campaigns. Both of them happened when I was either running to get back in office or running for re-election. Both of them initiated by people who were trying to get to office. That never got out. It just got out RICO indictment, and just got out, well, he was putting people in the chair or whatever. And the whole truth just never got out. You would think 6 guys went into an office, beat up or whatever. Hey, we were in the chair, help us. And they didn't even complain. They just got called one day and told, hey, you're a victim.
Well, you say it didn't get out, but then you're notorious for not speaking to the media at all. Like you went.
What good would it do?
How long?
What good would it do? When I did speak to them, they didn't put out the truth. So it was like, why waste the time?
I mean, you always avoid it.
No, not always. Remember.
Well, maybe a long time ago.
Exactly.
But when was
exactly.
How long ago? 10 years ago?
Yeah. Well, my first term in office, I used to speak to them. And then when I realized that no matter what you say, like there would be key things to be said and they wouldn't even play it. Or One time I made a statement about one case and they used it and played it in another case like I was talking about that case. So, since when has ever going to the teller of a lie cleared up a lie? Right. You were at the State Patrol. Did you ever go to them and say, hey, that's incorrect? And they got back on TV and said, you know what? We got that one wrong. So why waste time when I could concentrate on what I was doing? Remember this. When you really concentrate on what you're doing, you're not really too much interested in trying to get your side out anyway. The only time I was interested in getting my side out was when it was on the criminal charges. And I know I couldn't use the media for that because I knew they weren't going to play it anyway because they had a vested interest in trying to get me convicted because they were mad at me for ignoring them. But when you're really concentrating on what you need to do, you really don't have time. If you spend so much time clearing up stuff, you'll never get anything done. Remember, if you chase a lie, it'll run. Mm-hmm. If you chase a lie, it'll run. So instead of chasing lies, I chase criminals.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to the point where you were convicted.
Mm-hmm.
How much time were you given?
18 months.
18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I always heard that, these officials, when they go to federal prison, they get it easy. They go.
I heard that too.
It's like a spa day. It's like going to the spa, like on a retreat.
I heard that too.
Is that where you thought you were going on a retreat?
I don't know if I thought that, but I did hear that when elected officials, it's not like I was sitting around studying elected officials who go to prison because I was too busy doing my job. I didn't think anybody was going to be able to make up something and accomplish as much as they did. But I wouldn't say I thought that, but here's the facts of the case. Most elected officials are sent to what they're called camps. And they're usually sent there, people with financial crimes or high profile or whatever are sent to those type of places. I was sent, and sheriffs. I know a sheriff that spent 5 years in prison, and he was in a camp. I wasn't sent to a camp. I was sent to an actual prison. And, you can say low security, medium security, you can say whatever you want. It's all the same. Let me tell you why. The feds have a system where you can work your way up or down the ladder. So if you start out in medium, you can work your way down to low, or you can work your way from low up to high, or you can work your way from high down to low. So not only was I put at one of those type of prisons, but I was put in the worst housing unit there. And that's why you see that lion's den on it, because we refer to it as a lion's den. Bank robbers, drug dealers, one guy shot a cop, one guy killed a cop. And it was a very, very violent housing unit. And no doubt that was probably done by design. Can we prove it? No, but it would have to have been. Because anytime someone got locked up, it was our policy at the Clayton County jail to make sure that we weren't going to put them in maximum security or put them somewhere where they'd be in danger. So no doubt that was by design. But it didn't turn out the way the people who did it intended it to turn out. Actually, I probably couldn't have met a better group of men.
Oh, gosh. So you go to real prison.
Yeah.
How did you show up? I heard that you went in a plane.
I did.
Okay.
I did. So, here's another thing.
Most private people, jet, let me be clear.
I did go in a private jet. I did. Okay. I did. Now, think about it. Most people, when they're sent to prison and they're told to self-turn themselves in, I can't say this for sure, but most of the people that I've spoken to about this, it was like driving distance or whatever like that. Okay. Where I was sent was somewhere way out in Arkansas. I'd never even been to Arkansas a day in my life. And it was about 1,000 miles away. So, of course, for a trip like that, you're going to have to spend the night, maybe start the day before. That's not the type of trip. I think I had to be there at 12 midday. So that's not the type of trip you wake up 6 a.m. and to do 1,000 miles. So it's just simple. It's easy. It was just an hour and I was there like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask you whose plane that was.
I'm sure you do want to ask me.
Whose plane was it?
Yeah, that's good. I wonder whose plane is it?
I don't know.
Yeah, mystery. The inquiring minds.
So you're not gonna say whose plane it was,
right? Yeah, I've heard all types of stuff. I've heard it's my plane. I've heard I've heard all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm.
That's the plane that brought you back. The same one.
It was a different plane. That was a different plane that brought me back, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You get to prison, and I mean, you're a cop in prison. I would imagine has a target.
Oh, no doubt,
on their back.
no doubt. The only people lower than cops in prison, especially that prison, would be a child molester. Yeah, I actually had an inmate tell me that. He said, you know, I'm amazed at how well everybody gets along with you here. He said, I wasn't expecting that. And I said, why? And he said, hey, you know, cops don't do well here. The only thing lower than a child molester is a cop. He said, but here it looks like they revere you for some reason. And I said, really? So
you didn't have any problems? You managed to get along with the inmates? How did that happen?
I mean, well, let me tell you this. When I first got there, I didn't know where I was going. They just told me, hey, report to that unit or whatever like that. So I'll never forget this. About 2-3 hours later, I get called back up. A guard comes and gets me and say, hey, they want to see you. I was like, okay. And it's like, and I was asked, hey, is anybody messing with you? And I said, no. Do they know who you are? I said, yeah, everybody seems to know who I am. They even know how I got here. I'm not sure how that happened. So he started laughing. I think you and I both know how that happened, right? And then he said, are you scared? And I said, no. He said, well, if you got any problems, let us know. Now, how I was supposed to let them know, I don't know, because this jail was kind of like, I mean, we were actually more advanced at the county jail. It's a federal facility, but once they lock you in, you just in there. There's no cameras. There's nothing. You don't see a guard unless he unlocks the door and comes in. So it's just 200 and some people all locked in together. So whatever happens, happens. You know what I'm saying? And so unless you can run to the door and beat on it and pray that they hear, which some people had to do because they were being beaten and chased out, you know, you was pretty much on your own. Well, 3 months later, I guess nobody heard from me or whatever. I get this call again, and it's not the warden, but somebody right under him. I can't remember who it was because I really didn't talk to a whole lot of guards when I was there. Yeah, the only guard I ever talked to was my case manager because, I mean, what purpose would it serve? I wanted to get to know the people I was with. You know what I'm saying? So, get called back up there, and I get asked, hey, I understand you're a high-ranking official in Atlanta. Something like that, yeah. He said, we're just checking on you. Is anybody messing with you? No, sir. He's like, how's your family? I said, they're great. He's like, are you having any problems? What kind of problem? I mean, like, you know, emotional? Can we? No, I'm fine. And the room just got silent. It was like an awkward silence. And then I went back. I was like, okay, well, I appreciate it, but that was it. But you know what was interesting to me about that is if you really thought that was a concern, why even put me in there? Because I know anyone that comes to my jail when I was sheriff, anyone we even had an inkling of, whether they were a celebrity, an ex-cop or whatever, we knew what could happen. So we made sure that they were put somewhere where that wouldn't be an issue. Why put them in a place where you know that can happen? And I think the only logical reason that was done was two things. They were hoping that the inmates would force me into solitary confinement because they did that to a lot of people. A lot of people got beaten and forced to check themselves into solitary confinement. Or either some people came in and just were so terrified by what they saw, they went back and asked to be in solitary confinement. I mean, one guy, we felt real bad for him. I mean, he came in, he wouldn't sleep, he wouldn't take a shower. And I could see a guy like him not wanting to, because I mean, all the thugs were in the shower. You know, that's where they just hung out there to smoke or whatever they were doing. And so if you really thought that I was in danger, why even put me in there to begin with?
Who did you befriend? What kind of people? What were they in there for? Who were they?
Well, again, like I told you, you know, people never all type of charges. Bank robbery. Like I said, one had shot a cop. One had killed a cop. Drug dealers. There was a few pimps or whatever. It was a wide variety of background. It was a diverse community.
And you just fit right in. They just brought you in the fold.
Yeah, for lack of a better term.
So were you protected while you were in there?
Let me tell you this, and I would say yes. Let me tell you this. It's very interesting. There were two drug lords there that were from Atlanta. One actually came down. He ran the unit upstairs. And one actually came down when I first got there. That same time when I told you, they called me back 3 hours later. And he said, I just came to see if it was true that you were here. And I was like, he said, I'm from Atlanta. And he introduced himself to me and we spoke briefly. And then he left, And I would never imagine from that brief meeting that he and I would develop a very interesting relationship. There was another major drug lord that I met, and I had no idea who I was talking to. But interestingly, when I found out what was going on, his family lived in Clayton County. And he put the word out. He said, look, that guy's like Robin Hood there. They love him. They felt safe. He said, he's not a bad cop. If he was, I would tell y'all he was one. He said, I don't know why he's here. It's probably something political. He said, it sounds like some BS to me. But he's not like those other cops. And I think based on him, based on the other drug lord from Atlanta, based on the head of the vice lords that actually ran that unit or whatever. And these guys became guys that I talked to every day. And I mean, and some of them, one of them was like a celebrity there. You would have thought he was a sheriff. In some ways, he was a sheriff. And, and I think a lot of that came from that. But it's interesting that, you put me in a situation where people you think is going to hate me and want to hurt me, and they didn't even agree with it. They helped me write the book. They started helping write briefs that they wanted me to send to their attorney. Some of them had been in a restraint chair. So you're thinking, okay, here's a population that's going to hate him, and that's really not true. I mean, really, it wasn't even true of most of the people in my jail, to be honest with you. Some of those guys in my jail keep in touch with me to this day. One of them I basically adopted. He's like a godson. And he was a member of a gang. And he was, and how I met him was he said, hey, I just want to thank you for getting me off drugs. And I was like, how did I get you off drugs? And he said, well, I couldn't get any drugs when I was in your jail. That's the only jail I've ever been in where I couldn't get drugs. So I ended up cold turkey off drugs. I'm not going back. And then eventually he became someone that we stay in contact to this day.
What life lessons did you learn? Anything different while you were in prison?
Let me tell you this. I met a lot of fascinating people. It was interesting to hear their perspective on things. And believe it or not, the guy that killed a cop talked to me almost every day. It was very interesting talking to him. And, it was almost like a meeting of the minds. And they would tease me because a lot of them say, hey, you need to get that overturned and go back to being sheriff. They said, but you're going to be a much better sheriff because now you know everything that we're doing now. And you know what to look for. So it always bothered me about that. And then some of them were like, no, you don't need to run for sheriff. Run for something where you can help us. You know what I'm saying? So it was some very interesting relationships that came out of there. Now, I'm not going to let you think I just went in there and everybody started hugging and kissing me. It was a very nasty environment. 5 people died of overdoses. There was a lot of drugs there. It wasn't clean. It was a very, very nasty place. And that really wasn't the fault of the inmates. It was just how the place was kept. The bathroom, there was mold in it and stuff like that. There was a lot of violence. There were a lot of people that, were beaten to the point that they had to go to the guards and get themselves checked in isolation or whatever. The one thing that I can say never happened in that particular unit is no one got shanked. The closest I ever saw that, I saw a guy pull a shank and was getting ready to, but the orderly, the head of the vice lords, told him to put it up and or he was going to get put out. So, I mean, he stopped it. I mean, he ran that place a lot like I ran Clayton County. So I was real impressed with his leadership.
So how did your mental health while you were in there, mentally, emotionally, how did you deal with things while you were in there?
Well, let me say this. I don't think there was anything mentally, emotionally, or whatever. It was a case that needed to be fought and it's still being fought. I know I was set up, We know we got to take it to the Supreme Court. So, you know, you got to understand, I don't care if you can bench press 500 pounds, like my brother always said. If you're mentally weak, you're weak. So I didn't have any problems here. I think that's probably why we all got along so well. So
you were already mentally tough when you went in, and so you had no issues with that.
Yeah, well, you know, like you read in a book, and like they would tease me. It's like, hey, we think you found your long lost brother. I mean, you throw me in a lion's den, but you know.
Then what's your Achilles heel? If that doesn't break you, if that, I say break you down, what does?
I never sat around and thought about what breaks me. I mean, that's a weird question. I never thought, like, you know what would break me? I never even gave it a thought. Remember this.
Are you superhuman?
No, I wouldn't say I'm superhuman. I would just say that it's very, very important. You know, my dad was a member of Special Forces. He was a SEAL. You know, he fought in the Vietnam War. He fought in the Korean War, and you know, SEALs used to be called frogmen. Then it turned to SEALs and everything like that. But he was a part of that unit. But the one thing that he and all of the other people I know in Special Forces always taught me was this: you know, you don't normally see bodybuilders in Special Forces. And I'm not saying that they don't have them. And it's not really about the person's size. It's not really about this. It's about whether they'll break under pressure or whether they'll quit. So, you know, like they might drop them 50 miles in the woods and tell them, hey, find your way home. Well, if a guy breaks down and starts crying and say, come get me, well, they know we can't put him in a combat situation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, everything about life, you know, life is, whether you got a corrupt DA trying to put charges on you, or whether you wake up one morning and find out you've lost a loved one in a flood like some people did, you've got to be mentally strong to keep going no matter what. It's not about being superhuman. It's not about being a tough guy or anything like that. It's just about being mentally strong enough to handle life, because things are going to happen in life. You got to be mentally strong enough to command. You know. I think you see the quote in the book, you know, an army of lions led by sheep will be defeated by an army of sheep led by a lion. But when you say lion, you're not necessarily talking about strength. You're talking about mentality, because you got to think about it. The lion is not the biggest or strongest animal. That's the elephant. You know, he's not the fastest. That's a cheetah. And he's definitely not the tallest. He's a giraffe. He's a lion. He's a king because of his mentality. So you got the tallest animal in the jungle. When he sees a lion, he thinks run. Why? It can't be because, hey, he's taller than me. It's because of mentality. Mm-hmm. The lion sees a giraffe, he thinks lunch. The giraffe sees a lion, he thinks run.
What's your higher power? What's higher than you?
What's higher than all of us? Of course, it's going to be God.
You believe?
We all better believe.
Do you pray?
We all better pray. That's
I'm just asking.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
I don't know. I mean, some people don't.
Some people don't. No, I believe in prayer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, if I had been locked up like that, I would be praying. I would be, you know, I don't know. That might have been my breaking point.
Nah, you tougher than that.
I don't know. Who knows?
You tougher than that.
You don't know sometimes.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but you know, I will say this: there were people there. There were people there serving hard time. There were people serving. One guy was serving 30 years, and he'd already done 10, and his last appeal came back, and he realized, you know. Well, he thought actually he had something else he can do, and I'm glad to find out that he can. But, you know, I probably spent about 2 hours talking him out of taking his life, because he was like, I can't do 20 more years. Mm-hmm. You know, so, but he didn't do it. And before I left, he was back in the fight. So I always felt good about that, because, you know, let me tell you, there's a lot of people in prison. Let me see something interesting about the guys that were in prison. They're not necessarily saying that they were innocent, but what they were saying is how they were prosecuted, or the over sentencing, the disparity in it. I'm not going to go into details, but, there were people in there that had done far worse than he did, and they were serving 5 years and he was serving 30. So it was just disparity. Who knows? Was the judge in a bad mood that day or whatever? And he wasn't saying he didn't deserve to be in jail. He was just saying, why am I getting a life sentence? I didn't kill anybody. I didn't even touch anybody. You know what I'm saying? And that's reasonable. Right. He's not saying, I'm not saying don't arrest me, whatever like that. I'm just saying it's reasonable. And then you got to ask yourself, if you could take an elected sheriff, make up a law, you just one day decide something's against the law, and you admit, even the judge admits, you can look at it on a transcript, there's never been a case like this. She called it novel. She said there's never been a lawsuit like this. And if there never has, and it was never clear, then why was I sent to prison? So if that can happen to me, I would suspect there's more people in jail that that's happened to than we can imagine. And think about that, and think about the amount of time they're facing and everything like that.
Is this the end of it, or can you go anywhere else with this?
Oh yeah, we're going up to the Supreme Court. Absolutely.
Okay, so you're still fighting.
Oh, absolutely.
And then
remember, we never quit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
there's no such thing.
If you never quit, do you have plans to run for sheriff? Let's say if they overturn everything, expunge your record, do all of those things, then are you planning to run for sheriff?
I mean, I never say never to anything. It depends on where I'm at, what I'm doing, and how I feel at the moment. It just depends.
Today, now, how do you feel?
How do I feel
about running?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problems with running again. I'm not a guy I'm not one of those guys that, well, y'all can have it or whatever like that. Never quit. If there was two words that I believe in, I think that's on a special forces symbol. I think it's a knife, and on one side it says never, and it says quit. You never quit. You never yield to the enemy. You never give up. All right. All right, that's for the week.
The rap songs, the video games, rap songs talking about Victor Hill, Clayton County, got video games showing up with your patrol car. Did you have a hand in any of that?
I don't know how to rap, and sad to say, I'm not that good at video games. Even though my nephew tried to get me up to date, but
So it was someone else's idea to.
Yeah, it was. And you know what? It's very flattering because the good or bad, the fact that I was a street cop all of my life, so I think that's a higher a badge of honor than just someone giving you a plaque for community service. That meant that there was actually an effect on the streets, and that was my job, to keep the streets clean. So, and some people express it differently. I mean, there's a lot of rap songs out there. I mean, there was a gang that made a rap song that wasn't flattering, and there's some that make them that are flattering or whatever. But I think the message was that they knew that if they were in Clayton County, they had to deal with me. And I don't think you can ask for any more. I think if you're the sheriff of the county, and every criminal should know who you are. I'm not saying rappers are criminals. I'm not saying that, because most of them are just artists. But they represent street life or thug life. So it let me know I'm doing my job. Right. Everybody that's a criminal should know you're the sheriff. When you get out your car and you walk in a store and there's something illegal going on, it should stop, because they should know. If not, and they don't know, or they don't stop, then that means you're not doing your job. So I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I had a guy I knew, he bought a complex. It was in the county, but it was really an incorporated city. And he asked me, he said, hey, I need you to go to lunch with me today. And I said, okay. I said, well, where you want me to meet you? He said, no, come and pick me up. And I was like, why? So when I got to the office, I picked him up. We went for lunch and came back, and he said, thank you, that's all I need. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I got some thugs around. I just want them to see you come here. And I knew that they were going to leave. You know what I'm saying? I was like, hey, okay, well, that's what it takes. Good. Thank you. You know? But he knew, hey, just me coming there would be the talk or be like, okay, why is he here or whatever like that. So that meant we were doing a good job. And not just me, but you know, I couldn't be everywhere. I had a very good team. I recruited them. I was trying to recruit a team that could win the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. So I had the fastest runners. I had some of the strongest guys. I had women that were able to do the job and was on the SWAT team. And, you know, they're the ones that really did the work. Mm-hmm. You know, I was just fortunate enough to be able to find some of the best.
For the people who miss Victor Hill in mm-hmm. Clayton County, what would you say to them?
Hey, I miss you too. Yeah. You know, they know what this, let me tell you something. They know what it was about. There's another reason why they took it, that Tasha brought in the feds. She knew that she couldn't tell a jury in Clayton County any silliness like that. So they knew they would have to take it out the county and be people that don't know me, probably just listen to the news, and the news was only going to feed just enough to do whatever. And they were very careful not to put the people of Clayton County on there, because the people of Clayton County know me and they know the history of it. And they know that there's been this push by the certain political factor to come up with something and get me out of office. So I've always had a great relationship with the citizens of Clayton County. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what's real community policing, when you have a connection. You don't have to make a video and start breakdancing and get on TV and cry and breastfeed babies and sew a COVID mask during COVID. If you just connect to the people and you're there for them when you need them, to me, like I would tell, sometimes people would ask me, hey, I want to come work at the sheriff's office. Okay, well, I don't want to go on the street. I just want to do something in the community. I said, okay, that is doing something in the community. If you stop people's houses from being broken into, stop people's daughters from being raped, stop their sons from being killed, what more can you do in the community? I mean, if you come in here to break dance and stay still like a mannequin and make a video, I don't need that. I need crime fighters. You know what I'm saying?
So you don't like this community policing the way that it's being done currently by a lot of agencies?
No, I don't. I think community policing has its value, but you know, how do you define it? I think what we were doing was community policing. If a little old lady calls me and says, I'm afraid because there's a drug house across the street, and these guys are shooting in the air. They got these ferocious dogs or whatever, and I don't know what to do. And I pop up and I tell them to leave. That's community policing. I think that goes far more than me. Hey, I'm gonna come and put a grill and bake some hot dogs. I mean, you know, community policing is taking care of the people, and they know they can trust you, and they know they feel safe with you. I'm not saying that, you know, you can't have a cookout once every blue moon, if that's what you want to do. But there's nothing about making videos and cookouts that reduce crime. You know, at best, what we can hope for is we built a rapport with someone, because we used to do it in homicide all the time. We wanted to build a rapport with people in the streets, because when someone get killed, they trust telling us who killed them. That's what community policing is about. Mm-hmm. But I think when you have to go out and prove, I got to prove to you I'm a nice guy. Mm-hmm. I got to prove to you I'm human. Okay, who said I wasn't? I mean, am I alien? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that, and the thugs don't take that serious anyway. Have you seen any thugs say, you know what, I saw this officer cry today, or I saw this officer playing with a doll, so you know what, I think I'm going to stop killing people and robbing people. That's not the case. So treat people, be there for them when they need you. To me, that's real community policing.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay. So while you're fighting your case, mm-hmm. what else are you doing? What's next? Do you have?
There you go. There you go.
You've had this that opportunity a few times.
That's your book, by the way. Let me give that back to you.
To hold your book up, it was released last week.
I think it was pre-sales last week, and then this week it got released.
Okay, so the book is out there. Mm-hmm. It's called Vigilante Sheriff, mm-hmm. By Victor Hill, and you say that the inmates actually helped you.
Actually, that book is dedicated to them.
Okay.
Really, that book was their idea. They edited the book, you know. That book would really never got written without them. I met some guys that were authors or other guys that got involved in it. They literally checked on the progress of that book every day. One whole chapter got X because they said it was boring. And that was about, I actually was a state representative, so I wrote a chapter about that, and I was like, hey, what's this? We don't want to read about this. We want to read about cops and robbers, and so, so it's interesting. So I really got to give them credit. That book would have never happened without them. And like I said in the book, I hope, I wrote from their perspective as well. It wasn't just about my case. It wasn't just about weaponizing and misusing the criminal system against me. It was their story too. And like I said, most of them wasn't even saying, I can only think of one that said he was innocent, and I believe he is innocent. I mean, they destroyed the DNA and he can't even submit it, But most of them wasn't about, I'm innocent, I shouldn't be here. It was about the fallacies and unfairness in the system. It was about how they were being treated there at the prison. Like, some of them actually had paid jobs. And I think one of the highest paid jobs was like 18 cents an hour. And I think they got a legitimate point there. I mean, think about it. Okay. The law says minimum wage is what? What is minimum wage?
I don't even know what it is.
Okay, you made so much money you wouldn't know. It's guys like me that had to be worried about minimum wage. But anyway, what I think it's 13 or whatever. But okay, if these guys are willing to work and they got families back home and everything like that, okay, and they're willing to work, and we all tell them, well, when you get out, why can't you just get a job like everybody else? Okay, well, they're willing to work there, but you only pay them 18 cents an hour. Why? Okay, they get out of jail. It's hard for them to find a job. It's easy for us to say, well, why can't you just find a job? But then the law forbids them from doing this and doing that. You can't be a doctor. You can't be a lawyer. You can't do whatever. But yet, why can't you go find a job? Okay, well, we invite people to church and we tell them the Lord's going to forgive them all their sins, but we don't forgive them. You know what I'm saying? They paid their time, and if they're willing to work for real, why can't they? Now, if they want to go back out and start committing crimes, that's a whole nother situation. But perhaps they wouldn't be forced to or tempted to if they knew they still had opportunities like other people did. And I think it's very, very fair what they were saying. We had a lot of interesting debates. Probably the most interesting debates is about firearms. And it was interesting because, we got in some real spirited debates. Because, my thing was about taking guns out of the hands of criminals anyway when I was sheriff. That was my main strategy to keep the murder rate down. But, they made some valid points. A couple of them like, okay, well, if I'm here for tax fraud or I'm here for whatever, it's not a violent crime. Why can't I go hunting? Why can't I have something to defend myself with? He said, I could see if I was here for robbery, or I could see if I shot somebody. Then, of course, I shouldn't have a gun. And I really didn't have a comeback for that. I really didn't. And so, it was a lot of spirited debates. It was very, very interesting because, there's a group, there's just like in society, there was a lot of sectors. There was a group of intellectuals there, and they were very interesting. We probably meet every day at the library and talk. Then you had your thugs that was running around beating up people and selling drugs and stabbing folks and doing what they do, just like in the world. So it was very, very interesting. But, it gave me a chance to see the other side. It's not like I wasn't used to being around criminals. I grew up, my family used to live in a project when I came up. It's not like I've been a cop all this time, so it's not like I was a stranger to them. But it was the first time I actually got to live with them every day. So that was interesting.
Did you already know how to play chess? You talked about some of the things in the book. You talked about what you guys did while you were in prison. You played chess, and what were some of the other things you did?
I knew how to play chess, and I thought I was a good player till I got there. I met some real chess masters there. One day I was walking, I'll never forget this. I saw 4 guys playing chess. Each one had 16 pieces. It's called 4-dimensional chess. And I stopped and I was trying to figure out, what are y'all doing? And they're like, we're playing 4-dimensional chess. Well, what's that? And so you got 4 people. They're either all playing each other or they play in teams. I've never seen it, never heard of it a day in my life. I thought it was something they made up. And then eventually they taught me how to play and let me play as well too. So those guys literally became my professors. You would think I would be the one they're teaching. I learned a whole lot more from them than they ever can learn from me. So my chess game is better because of them. I know how to play, and one thing I'm embarrassed about, I know this sounds bad, but I never played dominoes till I went there. And, I got teased about that, and they were like, you must be didn't go to the cookout. But then once they taught me, I couldn't stop playing,
Right.
Yeah, so, but they, I learned a whole lot from them. I really did. I really did. And I appreciated the help that they tried to give me legally and everything. Just a fascinating group of guys. Met some great preachers. There were some people that became preachers. I think they're going to be phenomenal when they get out. I would go listen to them preach. And that was interesting. One of them, I guess you could probably say he was my pastor when I was there. But, I mean, some amazing sermons I heard. So it was a balance. It was a yin and yang. Was it all good? Of course not. Were people getting beat up and drugs? Of course it was. It was everywhere, right? But it wasn't everybody. It was two groups there, and I got a chance to socialize with both of them. So
Well, you know what? You've gone over a lot of information, just during this conversation, and so earlier you asked me what I thought about the book, and so I said I was gonna keep it until the end, my opinion until the end, and I think we are drawing to a close. So I want to say that when I read this book, I don't know if it's because I know so many people in this book that you're referring to, because you are very candid. You're basically calling the roll in this book.
I am.
You're naming names.
I am.
You're connecting dots about relationships and how one thing led to another, who's friends with this one and that one. You connected a lot of dots in this book. I don't know if it's almost too good to be true. Because you're like, there's no way, as I'm reading it, there's no way this could have happened and this could have happened, and taking a look at the history of how the things happen. So it's either a book full of lies that are very convincing, or it's the ugly truth.
Yeah, and
it's one or the other.
And I think it's the ugly truth.
It's one or the other.
You're an ex-cop, so I think a good cop can read a story and see through it, and it's the ugly truth.
So the way that it's put together in terms of, is it a book that I would recommend? I would say yes, for people to go get the book and see if you can see how these dots are connected, and do you think it's the truth or not. I'm not endorsing it to that degree, but I'm just saying in terms of if someone's a reader or if someone just wants to know, because there were so many things I did not know about Victor Hill. I knew you because we were in the law enforcement circle, but I was just as curious as the next person about, oh my God, why did he put these snipers on the roof? Oh my God, he's getting indicted, on RICO charges.
Exactly.
Here we go again. It's Victor Hill again.
Exactly.
You so I was that person.
You thought I was ahead of the mob for real.
I was that person, and we didn't even cover when you shot the woman. When you shot the lady,
let's go into that real quick.
You shot somebody.
Yeah, let's go
and
into
that was a mess.
Yeah, so let's go into that a second. So, when I first got with Clayton County Police, and what you think about this? When I first got with Clayton County Police, an officer was on a traffic stop, and he was holding some people at gunpoint. And I don't know if it was a backfire or whatever, but he had an involuntary twitch or whatever. His finger probably shouldn't have been on the trigger or whatever, and he shot the suspect. He wasn't indicted. He wasn't criminally charged or anything like that. And we know why. It was an accident. He didn't mean to do it. You spin it how you want. He didn't mean to do it. So no one thought to take him before a grand jury and charge him. The first deputy ever killed in the history the Clayton County Sheriff's Office, was killed during a training accident. The deputy that killed him either had the wrong weapon or the wrong training bullets. I can't remember. But when they were training, he shot him and he died. He was never indicted. It was a sad situation. I'm sure it was handled perhaps civilly or whatever like that. But he was not indicted. He was not fired or whatever. Why? Because it was an accident. There was no criminal intent. So, fast forward. I have an accident. Fortunately, no one dies. Unfortunately, these things happen. They don't just happen to the line officer or whatever.
What happened, though?
It was an accidental shooting. That's what happened. So the point I'm trying to get to is this. How do you explain that we have all these accidental shootings with officers and no one is indicted, and then when you get to mine, I'm indicted? So the point of the matter I'm trying to make is this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't indict people if they have accidental shootings. And I'm not saying that you should indict them. What I'm saying, and the whole point of the book, and when we talk about prosecutors and political motivations, is this. If you're going to indict one, you indict all. If you're not going to indict, don't indict none. But to indict a person because they hold a particular position. So basically, it's kind of like the case with the restraint chair. You're saying that all my sergeants, all my lieutenants, all my officers put people in a restraint chair, and we're not going to look into it. But if you put somebody in a restraint chair, and they did it 622 times, but you do it, it's a crime. Okay, you're going to say, hey, look, there's been accidental shootings in Clayton County before where one person died, but we're not going to indict them because it's an accident.
That shooting was in a different county, though, right?
It doesn't matter where it was.
I'm asking.
Yeah.
Okay, it was in a different county.
But you got to understand this, the connection there, just like the federal crime, the alleged federal crime was taken out of the county and done in federal court. But who pushed it? And why? Remember what I'm saying? So I think that's the point of the whole book. And that's what goes into weaponizing the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. If we're going to selectively prosecute people because that's the only way we can think to get them out of office, that's something we need to stop. I mean, if we're going to do it, let's just do it to everybody. Mm. But to only do it to a person because he's elected or he's someone we're trying to get out of office, the inconsistency is a problem. And even when I write from the perspective of the inmates, that's what they're saying too. They're not saying that they were necessarily innocent, but they're saying, well, if I did exactly what he did, why do I have 30 years and he has 5 years or whatever? And I think that we got to really take a look at that. Mm-hmm. And that's where, okay, how do you explain that officers who have killed people in the restraint chair, and it's just a lawsuit, I authorize to be someone in a restraint chair and I go to prison. Mm. That's what we're talking about.
When we talk about community policing, there's some cities that are in trouble.
You're correct.
There are some places, I don't know if it's, you tell me, is it that they're soft on crime? Are they having some other obstacles? Are the governing bodies like city councils or county commissions, are they involved too much in hindering these police chiefs and sheriffs? Well, not so much the sheriffs, but maybe the police chiefs. Are they hindering them?
It's both.
What is it? What do we need to do?
You know, let me get straight to it. And actually, there's a chapter on it. It's called "The Press, the Prosecutors, and the Robert Ford Syndrome." And let me just say this. First of all, and my case is a perfect example of it. Law enforcement is afraid to do their jobs, and rightfully so. Okay. They're in a situation around if they damn if they do, damn if they don't. If you use force, even if you're trained to do it a particular way, like let's go down a rabbit hole for a second. Let's take the Wendy's shooting. Okay.
We're talking about Wendy's in Atlanta.
Exactly.
2020.
Yes,
Ray Sharp Brooks.
Right.
Falls asleep in the drive-through line at Wendy's. 2 officers respond after being called there to get him to get him to move.
Absolutely. In that case, in some ways, that case, and I talk about that case because in some ways that case reminds me of my case, and I'll get into that in a second. But what that officer did, the optics probably wasn't good. A lot of people felt that it could have been handled a different way. And I'm not saying that it couldn't have been handled a different way. Every officer might have handled that situation a different way. But what he did, they trained us to do. You know that for a fact. You was a state patrol. Mm-hmm. And they trained us that when a person pulls a taser, that we can use deadly force. Okay, so here's where the problem comes in. Okay, he had other options, but the option he chose based on his training and based on the law is not illegal. Well, we train officers to do things, and then when they do it, they get prosecuted. So now they're hesitant. And they even had to come and admit, well, the training and the law says he can do it, which is why we're taking my case to the Supreme Court, because my training and the law said I could do what I did with the restraint chair. So if we're going to train them to do something and create laws that say they can do it and then prosecute them because they get tried in the court of public opinion by the media, they're going to become hesitant. Mm-hmm. And when they become hesitant, more of them are going to get hurt and killed because they're hesitant to defend themselves. But even worse, more of the public that they're supposed to defend are going to get hurt because they're hesitant to do anything. Mm-hmm. And thus, you give the criminals this type of power where they know, kind of like what happened in the schools when they took corporal punishment out and you had all the kids saying, you can't do nothing to me. Well, that's pretty much what the criminals are saying. So we shouldn't be surprised that the crime is high. But see, here's what people need to remember, and it's in my book. Even criminals are tough on crime. Criminals don't like living in high crime areas. I remember when I was a homicide detective, a drug lord moved next to me. I was doing security at an apartment complex, and a DEA contacted me and said, hey, there's a guy we've been watching for a while, and he just moved next door to you. And we just need you to know that because we're planning on making a move. Well, I couldn't give this information out, but I just happened to go talk to the apartment manager and say, hey, I got a new neighbor. You know anything about him? And I'll never forget that. She said, real nice guy. When I told him that an officer lived there, he said, yeah, I want to live next to him because I want to feel safe. Okay. When I was in prison, they were tougher on crime than I was. You stole something, it got handled. I remember my tablet got stolen. I didn't go to the guards. I went to the sheriff, the head of the vice lords, and said, hey, look, my tablet is taken. He said, okay, we'll look into it. So one night, I'm in Bible study listening to one of those preachers give a good sermon saying amen, you know what I'm saying? And I hear a man screaming and running. And you could tell. And then I hear all these steps running after him, and they're chasing him. And he's running, screaming help for his life. And he gets to the door, and he bangs. Fortunately, the guards were there, and they rescued him. Well, when I get back, my tablet is on my bed. Even criminals.
They police themselves.
Exactly. So, people, and I think that was the misconception with the people who plotted to send me to that prison. They thought the criminals were going to hate me. Hey, they like law and order. Mm-hmm. He ran that particular unit the way I ran Clayton County. Actually, he ran it rougher because, they actually used physical violence. I didn't. Mm-hmm. But, we've got to be realistic with this. And that's why the crime is high. Crime is high because officers are afraid to do their job. And they're even more afraid to do their job now. They're afraid to use a restraint chair. They don't know what to do now. So when you get prosecutors, which I call Robert Ford syndrome prosecutors in the book, and it's all explained there, but when they get tried in the court of public opinion, and then they get a prosecutor who needs 15 seconds of fame, so I tell you what, let me indict him. And you can indict anybody. Mm-hmm. You got a group of people in a room, and they only get told what they get told, and prosecutors can either omit facts or outright lie to them, and there is no checks and balance for it. And they tell them one side of the story, and no one is allowed to be in there to tell their side of the story or have their attorney. And this is why cops are so afraid to do their jobs. Now, I'm not saying we should let cops just run free and do whatever they want to do. We can't do that. I mean, I had to fire a lot of people. And a lot of times I had to do with use of force, not just theft and stuff like that, but I had to do with use of force. But at the same time, there has to be a balance. You can't let them run wild, but at the same time, you can't handcuff them, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm. Are the officers hesitant about what to do because they don't know if they're going to be backed by their own leadership as well?
Absolutely, because their leadership is afraid. They're afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for their freedom.
Why are they taking these jobs, though? You got a lot of folks out here applying for police chief all over the country for various reasons. And they know, and a lot of times they've done their research even before they put in for the job to sort of know what the culture is, or what the history has been there, or kind of how that city council is, or what it's a little bit of what it's gonna be like. And they're still taking the jobs, and they're handcuffed when they get those jobs, and they're not able to really do effective law enforcement leadership like they should be able to, because they're trying to appease the person on the board.
Well, let's be honest. Most of the people who become chief or sheriff, a lot of times, they're not tenured yet, so they don't get to enjoy the fruits of their labors with retirement like you have and like I have. So they need their job. So let's be realistic about that, and that's understandable to a degree. So they got a high-paying job that they need in order to support their families or whatever. So they're terrified about losing that job because they know a mayor can get rid of them overnight, or a DA can just start messing with them overnight, like what happened in a situation with me. So they got that. They got financial, and then they're worried about prosecution. So, and that's why you see most of them. It's rare now that you see a chief or sheriff talk about actual policing or what they're doing to clean up the streets and how this is not going to be tolerated. It's rare. Mostly all you hear them talk about is community policing. They're like, we're going to do stuff in the community, all type of, like that, because they know they can't do anything else. They're too afraid to. So then they start, grilling hot dogs and making dance videos and pantomiming and breastfeeding babies. I showed you the article.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah. You showed me an article of an officer
and even though that's sweet, that's sweet. Okay. That has absolutely nothing to do with running the folks out who are raping, robbing, and murdering. Those guys are not impressed with that. I write about it in the book. I was at a symposium, and one of our beloved rappers and beloved figures, of course, I'm a fan of his, Killer Mike. We're sitting at a symposium. I'll never forget this. And it was actually Jeff. He starts talking about, we got to do stuff in the community. He's talking about whatever. And Killer Mike, out of nowhere, just says, we laugh at Officer Friendly, right? And it was so profound what he said at that moment. I mean, that's Killer Mike. And there's a reason he got a name Killer Mike. He was once on the streets. So he understands the streets. And there's nobody that's on a robbing crew hitting licks that's saying, you know what? I saw the police chief cry at a conference today. I think I'm going to stop robbing people. You know what? I saw this officer on the ground playing with a doll baby. You know what? I don't think I'm going to sell drugs anymore. They're such nice people. And if all of that truly, truly worked, if that really, truly worked, how do we explain the Atlanta riots? They had already made all these dancing videos talking about 'cause I'm happy and stuff like that. So we shouldn't have had a riot. Everyone should have known, wow, they're humans too. We love them. They love us. We can do the Barney song. It shouldn't have been the case. Again, we got to remember what that job is about. Back in when the settlers moved out west, they elected men like Wild Bill Hitchcock, Bat Madison, for a reason. Because they wanted to elect somebody strong enough to confront the outlaws and run them out of town. Now we're electing feel-good politicians, okay? And, that's not going to solve the crime problem. I mean, if you want to be a dancer or a singer, that's fine. There's a career out there for that. But when you're the sheriff, you need to be the sheriff. Mm. And you need to let the outlaws know it's time to go. And everyone respects that. Mm-hmm. Even the inmates I was locked up with respect that. They don't want crime. They did not tolerate anyone stealing. They didn't just do that for me. A whole lot of people got disciplined, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And when I say discipline, I mean discipline. I'll never forget, one inmate masturbated in front of a female guard. All the guards came running in. They shook his cell down. Better not do that again. We're gonna write you up. And they left, and he was just sitting there grinning. 5 minutes later, some soldiers popped up from the vice lords. And I mean, they had to literally mop the blood away. And he was told, go check yourself in. Don't bring that around here. Now, these are inmates. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying that let's make sure we preface this here. I'm not saying the police should go and beat up people who masturbate in front of women. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, even criminals appreciate law and order. And in that particular unit, which was the most violent unit in the section, even they kept law and order there. You're not going to steal. You're not going to do this here and there. You know, it was an interesting honor among thieves.
There was one thing in your book when you were talking about fighting crime and taking over territory. Mm-hmm. And tell me again about when you noticed. I think it was the guy at the store standing at the corner store, and there were people standing around at the corner store. I think one of them ended up actually being someone that they found out that murdered.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I had a break in between terms, and I stopped at the Quick Trip on Riverdale to get some gas, and there was just like maybe 15 guys on the side of the store just hanging out, playing music, you know. And that was something that wouldn't have happened when I was in office, because I always kept the front of the stores clear. It's just dangerous. It's not, all the stuff about, well, they don't have nothing to do. That ain't true. We got like 6 community centers in there. It's something to do, but not stand in front of a business. And we saw in an adjacent county where a woman went to a store and there were some guys hanging in front of the store, and they ended up robbing her and killing her. So, but anyway, when that happened, I remember talking to a friend of mine that was still on the force, and I was saying, that's a lot of guys standing in front of the store. I said, y'all need to start sweeping that again. And they were saying, well, the people in charge don't really let us do that anymore, or whatever. I guess trying to be nice or whatever like that. Well, 2 weeks later, one of the guys that stood out to me, a deputy gets killed. And it turns out it was one of the guys that I saw when they showed us picture. So there was already a warrant out for him. So if my street sweepers had still been on the street and they rolled up there and ran everybody's name and told everyone to leave, they would have got him there. Mm-hmm. And maybe that officer would still be alive today. Mm. So a lot of that stuff, littering, loud music, it's not so much that you're trying to deal with when you crack on stuff like that. What you're trying to do is crack down on the stuff that comes out of it. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a bunch of guys hanging out, then there's no one to shoot on a drive-by shooting. Mm-hmm. There's no one to harass because they're not there. So what you're doing is you're cracking down on the gang-like behavior, and that's how you root some of the stuff out. We've actually stopped people just for loud music, and the car was stolen. Mm-hmm. As hard as to believe. So we end up getting a stolen car off the street, or sometimes we stop a car for loud music and they're wanted for a robbery or whatever like that. Mm-hmm. So it's not being overly hard. It's just keeping order, keeping things where people can live. We all love music, but, it needs to be a certain level. We got to be respectful of older people in the neighborhood and stuff like that. And usually the people that are involved in that type of behavior usually got something else going on. And when we cracked down on things like that, it was able to bring the whole crime rate down.
I remember a couple years ago, when we had so many issues with these so-called street racers or folks liking to, they like to demonstrate, if you will, with their vehicles. And they would shut down traffic. on the interstates, and were wreaking havoc in almost every metro Atlanta county.
Mm-hmm.
But when they came to Clayton County, it was a different story.
Mm-hmm.
When you were sheriff. Tell me about what directives you gave your deputies as it concerned people shutting the interstates down or the streets down.
Well, the first directive was it's not going to be tolerated. We're not going to let it happen. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for them. I mean, if a car gets out of control, they can accidentally hit someone, which has happened. And it's just a dangerous situation altogether. I mean, we got a racetrack right down there that they open up, and there's a place and time for that, but not on the streets. And there was two things that had to happen. Number one, we had to send a message that you can't do it in Clayton County. Of course, they're back now, okay? Mm-hmm. And they pretty much know they can come to Clayton County and do that now and don't have to worry. But the other thing was, how do you deal with it? So again, there's a strategy to it. You just don't drive up and say what y'all doing. Everyone's going to take off and start running, and you're going to create a situation where you don't know who to chase and more people get hurt. So you had to control the territory. You had to have a circle and kind of bring it in and make sure nobody could escape and make sure you got what you need so that if they do leave, they can't get out anyway. Mm-hmm. And when we did that, that pretty much brought an end to it. Mm-hmm. Now, since I've been gone, they've taken over different. I know they were on Riverdale Road one night and took over because I got a lot of calls on that. You know, people still call me about crime even in my retirement, right? But it worked. Mm-hmm. It worked, and I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize because people knew that street racists couldn't take over the street in Clayton County. I don't apologize because everyone knew better than to come near and riot, or everyone knew better than to hang out in front of stores there. That's the way it's supposed to be. And
your deputies were allowed to pursue as well.
They were, within reason.
Yeah.
You know, that's another thing that you know, I think the only people left that pursue probably now is the State Patrol. Mm-hmm. And at that time when I was sheriff, it was just us. It was the state, it was y'all and us that were pursuing. So, you know, within reason, nobody, I'm going to be just as worried about my mother and grandmother too if she just happens to be driving somewhere and a criminal is driving and runs into her because they're being chased. But here's where the politics get involved. Okay. Now we're prosecuting the officers, and we're prosecuting them in the court of public opinion, and sometimes even indicting them for these chases. Okay. Who should really be getting the brunt of that? Here's a person putting everybody's life in danger just so they can get away with a crime. And one thing we know, stolen cars are connected to almost every crime. For a criminal to commit a crime, he needs transportation. So let's be honest, and no insult to MARTA, but if you're a criminal and you're dependent on MARTA to escape the crime scene, you're done. There's no way you can break in a house and get a big screen TV and get on MARTA and get away. There's no way you can rob a bank and get away. You got to steal a car. So we know when people steal cars, it's connected to bigger crimes. One year, the first murder in Clayton County, when they came and killed the guy, was in a stolen car. So had that car been spotted in a jurisdiction they came from and they were aggressive about stopping or putting them off the road, that young man might be alive today. So we can't let criminals have transportation. So if we say, well, we're just going to let them go, we think we're preventing something now, but you may not be preventing a death in the future. You're saying, well, I don't want to chase him because I'm afraid we may have a wreck. Well, you don't chase him and he goes and he kills somebody, like in the situation we had with that first murder. So we've got to pursue them, but we got to think about how we're going to pursue them. What's the safest way to do it? I'm not saying we should chase everybody. I'm not saying that we should chase in all circumstances. Mm-hmm. But if we simply say, once you're in a car, we're going to let you get away because we're afraid. And why we're afraid? We're afraid because we're going to take the brunt of it. We're going to get prosecuted. We're going to get sued. We're going to be in a court of public opinion. So now, again, you got the police afraid to do their job. And when they're afraid to do their jobs, they do one of two things. They either hesitate or don't do anything at all. Mm-hmm. And when they don't do anything at all, it gives the criminal a chance to get away. And when he gets away, he gets to find another victim, because if he's out there raping, robbing, and murdering, and you don't stop him up then, now you've given him an opportunity to get to his next victim. Mm-hmm. So everything there's a balance. I'm not saying let law enforcement do whatever they want to whoever they want. Certainly not saying that. But at the same time, if we continue to handcuff them, if we continue to prosecute them for everything, if we continue to prosecute them for political reasons, just so a prosecutor can get on TV or just so someone can win an election or someone can stop someone from winning an election, then you get what we got now. And it's chaos.
You think we have chaos?
Absolutely, it's chaos. We saw it. You saw it during the Atlanta riots. That's a situation that it's in the book. In my involvements in the Atlanta riot, that's a situation that should have been stopped. There was a clear time to stop that, and by trying to be nice and show sympathy, it wasn't about that. There's two types of people that show up you got protesters and you got rioters. Okay, protesters are there for legitimate reasons. They're not trying to hurt anybody. They're trying to articulate a cause. They're trying to bring awareness. So they're going to give speeches. They're going to march. And that's beautiful. That's fine. But then you got this other group that show up, and they're rioters. They just want to see the city burn. They really don't care if someone got killed or not. It's just an opportunity to loot and burn and do whatever. And they come in and they take advantage of those situations. Well, of course, they make it bad for the protesters. But you got to remember, when you shut a situation down like that, it also protects the innocent protesters because they can get hurt in the middle of a fray. So I think when that situation happened, I think they were too afraid to shut it down because first they were going to have to deal with the press. Oh, my God, the police shut it down and they're not allowing people to give their free speech. That's not what it's about. It's about safety. If we allow this to keep going on, then what happened is going to happen. And that was death and destruction. It wasn't that we didn't want people to protest, just that it should have been shut down, and then it got completely out of control. And then when it gets out of control, there's only one way to bring it under control, and that's a use of force that we may never even had to have gotten to if it was just stopped in the beginning once that first incident happened.
As a result, your guys from Clayton County did get called in. They were requested, and you agreed to assist during the Atlanta riots. But then you pulled out.
It's true.
So what made you decide to go, and then what made you decide to pull out?
Well, of course, we're going to help a law enforcement agency. And at that point, Atlanta was over their head. And they wasn't, and let me just say this, APD was not over their heads because they couldn't handle it. They can handle it. They weren't allowed to handle it. When the protests first started, they didn't have riot gear, they didn't have shields. And I'm sure it was this, community police and feel good thing. Hey, we understand. But you got to be prepared, because you got to be prepared for the people who are showing up who aren't there to protest, they're there to riot. So you got to factor in that they're going to show up too. Okay. So they weren't allowed to handle it. So I don't want, I know a lot of guys with APD, and they were totally capable of getting that under control. So we're not going to indict the officers of APD because they could have handled it if they were allowed to. But when it got out of control, I agreed to come as long as, we're coming to handle business. We're not coming to sew masks and play with baby dolls or whatever like that. We got to put a stop to it. You know what I'm saying? And it was said it was understood. Well, we came back to help again, and then there's an incident that happened that was unfortunate. I think a car took off, and that's a whole nother story. I'm sure everybody has a side to the story. But when those officers were fired and arrested, it was like, well, if you're going to do that to your own officers, I'm sure you'll do it to my deputies. So I told them, come on back out, because I can't send my deputies in a situation like that and then they're second guess on every move they made. Now let's talk about high-speed chases, and let's talk about what happened. So you got an incident where the officers are trying to get some young people out of a car, and they take off, and they're not able to completely take off because there's some cars in front of them, and they catch up with them. And, of course, that's where the whole debate starts from there. So let me tell you what's interesting about that. Speaking about car chases, you could see on the media that one of the officers was stabbing a tire. And I remember them saying something about it. And I talk about this in the book. That was actually one of my deputies. And he was actually doing something I taught my deputies to do. Now, the media made it sound like, look, oh my God, they're stabbing tires. Well, let me tell you why I told my deputies to do stuff like that. I said, look, if we have to chase, we have to chase. But I would rather not chase a car if we don't have to. So if you're in a situation where you think it's going to turn into a high-speed chase, I would rather you puncture that tire and I pay to give them a new tire than us going 100 miles per hour through the city or the county and possibly someone getting killed or even you getting killed. I said, again, a wise general foresees problems and prevent them before it even happens. Well, after I called my deputies back, that deputy is terrified because he sees these Atlanta officers being arrested and fired, and he's like, oh my God, they're coming after me. And I said, hey, we're going to stand behind you on that. And, if we got to pay your legal fees or whatever, if they try to indict you, because that's not right. Because he was doing something I trained him to do. And the reason I trained him to do it is I was trying to find a way. How do we prevent the chase before it even happens? That way there's no wreck. There's no prosecution. There's no media. Let's just see if we can stop the car from being able to run. And I also invested in some high-tech equipment that you could get behind a car and lock up the tires and stuff like that. Because we're trying to find ways. Because we can't just say, okay, just let the criminals go. But because of the press and the prosecutors and the political pressure on officers, they don't know what to do. If we chase, we might go to jail. If we shoot, even though they tell us we can shoot, we're going to jail. If we put a person in a restraint chair, even though the policy says that we go to jail. So now you got a whole bunch of officers and they just don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Now, again, that don't mean they got the green light. I fired a whole lot of officers for excessive use of force. But if we don't get that yin-yang balance, where, we can't be too far here and too far there. It can't be go do whatever you want to do to people, but then it can't be don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And that's where they're at now. It's like they're handcuffed. They don't know what to do. They're scared all the way up to the chiefs and sheriffs. And you can't police in fear, and you can't lead in fear. Anytime you lead in fear, especially if it's law enforcement or a wartime situation or whatever, you're not going to be effective. And if you police in fear, you're not going to be effective. And I think the cops now are more scared than the school teachers. School teachers are terrified. Mm. They yell at a kid. They defend themselves. Oh, my God, you touched a child, you're going to jail. And I'm not saying teachers should be allowed to do anything. But I know when I was in school, we didn't have officers in the school. The principal was a sheriff. He literally carried a big stick. Mm-hmm. And we were all terrified. All the teacher had to say is, we call the principal, oh my God, he's going to come with that stick or paddle or whatever. Mm-hmm. But now we have to have the police there. And now when we have them there, now they're handcuffed. So let's go into that a second. We put these cops in schools. And some of these students are rough now. Mm-hmm. There's some selling drugs. There's some in gangs or whatever. There's some breaking in houses. And then you got some people that might just pop up at the school and start shooting because they're having a bad day. But then we tell the cops, hey, be friendly, hug the kids, be a nice guy, be their friends, cook for them, do this and that. And then all of a sudden someone pops up with a rifle shooting everybody. Mm-hmm. And you want him to switch from officer friendly to being a real cop. And it's not quite that simple. You send him to the range once a year. Once a year. Maybe the state patrol, I think y'all did twice a year, which is still ridiculous. But then now you want him to be a gunfighter. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's an issue we've got to address, because while community policing has its value, it has nothing to do with reducing crime. If it did work, then some of the most violent cities where they're doing community policing all the time shouldn't be violent anymore. Community policing reduce crime, then Atlanta, Chicago, Memphis should be the most low crime areas, because we know that the police loves us and we know they'll cry with us.
It's a lot of funding that goes into community policing programs.
We need to put that money in something else. Because all of the real cops anyway, before they came out with community policing, we were doing that anyway. I mean, I can remember being a rookie and the older cops, we're somewhere, there's a fire, and they come, hey, how much money you got? They ain't got no place to stay. Let's give them some money. We wasn't making any videos about it. It was just, hey, man, this is a bad situation. Let's see if we can help them out. It wasn't a production. It's almost like we out there trying to prove we're good guys. We shouldn't have to prove that. You know, you shouldn't have to prove, you know, you're going to be nice to people, you know. You know when to be nice to people. You know, I ran a guy out the county and bought him a pair of shoes. There was no production. He still had to leave. I just wanted to know why he was barefooted. What you doing out here? All right, why you got no shoes? Okay, you can't be out here. But I tell you what, walk over to that Dollar Tree right there and pick out a pair of shoes and then walk your way out the county. I didn't want the man barefooted, but he couldn't stand there on the side of the road either. You see what I'm saying? So there has to be a strong hand. There has to be a strong hand. There has to be strength. There has to be strictness. Anything else doesn't work. Not for crime anyway. You know.
So if a person had to choose between, do I want a community cookout with police officers, or do I want to live in an environment that I feel like is free from crime and safe, they should be choosing to put the money on being safe.
Well, think about this. Let's say your local police department or sheriff's office invites you to a cookout. Okay. So you at the cookout and you smiling and holding hands and crying and singing and everything. Meanwhile, while you over there, someone's breaking in your house, and you get back and your flat screen TV is gone, and they shot your dog. Okay. I think the people would really appreciate the fact that I had a car over there and that we either caught the person or deterred them from doing it. I've seen departments that I won't name, but I mean, they had like 8 or 9 people in a community relations team, and that's all they did. Now, meanwhile, the officers are short on the road, calls are backing up, but these guys are at the police station playing cards because they don't have a cookout to go to. I think the public and everyone would have liked to know we got 8 more people on the streets that's actually keeping us safe. So, you know, again, you got to prioritize and execute. There's nothing wrong with doing nice things for people. And I mean, and we did that at the appropriate time. I mean, sometimes things come up. You know, I had some people, they had a whole bunch of food. Hey, can you help us give it out? Yeah, sure. But that wasn't the priority. You know what I'm saying? I can't make that the priority. But if we see something that needs to be done along the way, it was done, you know. You know, we're still good friends to this day. Millionaire, billionaire, whatever he is. And out the clear blue sky, he would call me, hey, you know anybody needs help? Or, hey, look, come pick up all this money and give it to some people. Okay, well, I'll find somebody, you know. Well, I tell you what, just wait. And I mean, well, I find somebody that's getting put out there 3 months behind. Okay, you want to pay their rent, go pay it. Right, but it wasn't a production. It wasn't planned. We're out there trying to start break-ins, murders, and stuff like that. But if someone just happens to come up and be in need, and I know someone that can handle it, yeah, sure, we'll do it. You know what I'm saying? But that can't be the priority. And what's happening now is it's the focus. You talk to every chief and sheriff, and the first thing that comes out their mouth is community police. And it's rare you hear them talk about how we got a specialized unit that specializes in this, and we're going to use this surveillance technique or this equipment, and we're going to run these drug dealers out, and this is what we're going to do with the armed robbers and whatever like that. Everything is, you know, one love, one community. Okay, that's nice, but it ain't nice when a person's getting raped, robbed, or murdered. They want the real police to come and handle it. You
believed in your specialized units. You had different units for different things. Who was overseeing those units? In
a lot of ways, I was. You know, in a lot of ways, there were specialized units that I would have they had supervisors, but I would have direct contact and directing the mission and making sure. See, that's another thing we got to get away from, too. You notice, like, if there's a specialized unit and something happens, the first thing is, let's disband the unit. Okay, let's think about that for a second. If a uniform officer does something that's wrong, we fire him or prosecute him or whatever, do we disband uniform patrol? If you have a state patrol officer that does something bad, do you disband the state patrol? No. If a detective does something bad, we fire him and we deal with him, but we don't disband the CRD unit. But we got this thing now where if it's a specialized unit and one of them does something wrong, we disband the unit. That makes no sense whatsoever. You deal with whoever did what they did, and then you replace them. Those units serve a purpose. Red Dogs, the first year they were gone, or the first year they mission changed, there were over 300 murders in Atlanta. There was a direct correlation to that. Now, does that mean we let Red Dogs run and do whatever they want to do? No, of course not. If they out in line, they get disciplined. And my hand with my deputies was just as strong as my hand with my with criminals. But you don't disband a unit. I had a situation with my Cobra unit, which kind of like a Red Dog unit, and it's where one of the deputies beat a guy unnecessarily. It was a Lyft driver. Okay. He was fired. The case was sent to the DA's office. But I didn't disband Cobra. I just found me another Cobra unit. Remember, the mission goes on. You deal with it, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And when you're dealing with areas where there's high crime, where there's a lot of violence, you have to have those type of units. And you also got to understand this. You don't send a Boy Scout to catch a serial killer. It's not going to work. So you need a certain type of officer to handle that. That doesn't mean he gets free reign. That doesn't mean he gets to do whatever he wants to do. That don't mean he gets to mistreat people. But I got to send my toughest and boldest to deal with the toughest and boldest that the criminal element has to offer. I can't send them to people that got automatic assault rifles and only send them there with pistols. I got to give them the equipment they need, and they got to know they have my backing to do what needs to be done. And as long as they're right, fine. If they're wrong, we deal with it.
And you said something important about them knowing the mission. You can't be on a unit like that and not know clearly what the mission is.
I fear that I don't think most people on any law enforcement agency, I think if you talk to the average cop on most departments, you ask them what the mission is, no one knows what it is. It's usually some plaque up on a wall somewhere and it says all kind of good stuff or whatever. No one can tell you what it is. So you got to be real clear what it is. And our mission was simple. It's just 2 words: fight crime. That's the mission. And they got to know that, because if you don't, you get off into all these other things. Well, what are we really doing? Well, we're going to go cook some hot dogs. Well, we're going to go play with some dog babies or whatever. But what is our real mission? And you got to stay focused on that. Now, if you just happen to be somewhere and see something in need, or see a child and pick him up and kiss him and give him a badge, that's fine. Right. We're going to do that. But that can't be the mission. That can't be the focal point.
It's getting back to basics, basically.
Right, because we get away from the basics and we get what we got, and that's out of control crime, out of control jails. What is the real mission of a jail? We got to get back to what that really is. Really, jail is designed to put dangerous people in there that can be a danger to society. So we've gotten away from that. That's another issue that is addressed in the book that I wrote. We give people these long sentences, and then at a certain point, it becomes a convalescent home. I had an old warden tell me something I'll never forget. He said that when he became warden of that particular state, he went and he visited all of his institutions. And he went to maximum security. And when he got there was guards up on the wall with rifles. There was vehicles riding around. And when he got in, there was people on walkers and wheelchairs and on dialysis. And he said, hey, why do we have all this security for these guys? And they said, well, these guys are lifers. They're here for murder and stuff like that. He said, but who can get over the wall?
Right.
And he said, even if they got over the wall, where are they going to go? Where can this guy go? He needs dialysis. The other guy's on a walker. At some point, we're running a convalescent home. So what prison is really supposed to do is protect people from dangerous people. But, so we either over-sentence to the point where they're not dangerous anymore, or we just over-sentence people who they did something wrong and they're a threat to society. But, I don't know if that actually, if someone embezzled money from me, I would feel better knowing that they were forced to work and give me 50 cents of their income than knowing they're away for 12 years, because I'm still broke.
Right.
And if you're only going to pay them 18 cents an hour, they ain't going to be able to pay me back that way. Mm-hmm. So I think there's other ways we need to look at this more logically and prioritize and execute and do things that are actually effective and actually work. Mm-hmm. So I'm not downplaying community policing. Okay, it has its place. That's fine. But if we want to talk about what really works and what our mission really is, and that's to clean up the streets and keep people safe, that's not going to happen with cookouts and dancing videos. It's just not.
Wow. So that means we got a lot of folks wasting their time
and money on feel good programs. We feel good, and while we feel good, there's people that still got drug houses in front of them, people in and out, afraid for their grandchildren because when they start shooting, they can't shoot, and they hit your 3-year-old child. Meanwhile, we having a cookout. Talking about we bringing the community together. Let's move the drug house. That's how we bring the community together. Let's get that serial rapist off the street. That's how we bring the community together. Now we can really have a cookout. Now you can come to the cookout and know when you go back home, your 80-inch screen TV is still there. That's community policing.
Right.
The rest of it is just a bunch of fluff.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to cover?
No, that's about it. Did you like the book?
I just told you. I just gave a whole rundown. I gave a whole account.
Were you bored?
Of what
Were you bored?
I was not bored.
That's what I want to cover.
I was not bored.
It's not boring.
Not a boring book. Thank you so much.
No, you're very, very welcome.
I appreciate you.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed this.
All right.
Take care.
I enjoyed it too.
All right.
All right, Captain.